Welcome, dear listener, to a journey through generations of warmth, laughter, and magical mischief. Tonight, we'll trace the scarlet thread of the Weasley family through centuries of wizarding history, following their path from ancient roots to modern times. As you settle into your comfortable space, let the story of this remarkable family carry you gently into peaceful dreams. Close your eyes and picture a cozy burrow, filled with the scent of fresh bread and the sound of knitting needles clicking by themselves as we begin our tale of red hair, hand-me-down robes, and hearts as vast as the sky itself. So let's start at the very beginning, in the mists of medieval magic. In the rolling hills of Devon, where the morning mist clings to ancient stone circles and forgotten pathways wind through enchanted forests, the earliest traces of the Weasley name emerge from the shadows of history. The year is somewhere around the 10th century, and magic flows as naturally through the land as the streams that bubble through the valleys. The name Weasley itself whispers of old magic and older connections, derived from the ancient term Weasley, meaning the meadow of the weasel. It speaks to a family that has always lived close to the earth, understanding the language of growing things and small creatures. These early Weasleys were not grand sorcerers in tall towers, but hedge wizards and cunning folk who knew which herbs would cure a fever and how to encourage crops to grow tall and strong. Archaeological evidence discovered centuries later by curious descendants would reveal traces of early Weasley settlements throughout the West Country. Magical excavations uncovered small dwellings built partially underground, the first burrows, one might say, where families lived in harmony with the natural magic of the land. These homes, modest by any standard, showed signs of expansion charms even in those early days, suggesting that Weasleys have always had large families and made space for them through magical ingenuity rather than wealth. The medieval Weasleys practiced a form of magic that modern wizards might barely recognize. It was less about wand-waving and more about understanding the rhythms of the natural world. They knew when to plant by the phase of the moon, how to encourage rain through ancient songs, and which words to whisper to make bread rise perfectly every time. This practical, earthy magic would become a hallmark of the family through all the centuries to come. In those days, the separation between magical and non-magical folk was far less defined. The Weasleys of old served their communities as healers, weather workers, and problem solvers. When crops failed, they knew the old rituals to restore fertility to the soil. When illness swept through villages, they brewed potions in great cauldrons, adding ingredients by instinct and ancestral memory rather than precise measurements. They were respected, needed, and occasionally feared, but always they were part of the fabric of rural life. The family's connection to the legend of King Arthur runs deep, though shrouded in the uncertainty that cloaks all Arthurian tales. Family stories passed down through countless generations speak of a Weasley among Arthur's court, not as a knight of the Round Table, but as the keeper of the castle's gardens, ensuring that Camelot never wanted for food or healing herbs. This Weasley, known in family lore as Wendell the Warm-Hearted, was said to have saved Sir Gawain's life with a potion brewed from common weeds, earning the family a permanent place in the magical community's collective memory. The Norman conquest of 1066 brought upheaval to all of England, magical and mundane alike. The Weasleys, like many magical families, found themselves navigating new political realities. Norman wizards brought different magical traditions, more formal and ceremonial than the earth-based practices of the Anglo-Saxon magical community. Yet the Weasleys adapted, as they always would, learning new spells while maintaining their connection to older ways. During this period, the first written record of the Weasley name appears in a magical census conducted by William the Conqueror's court wizard. Listed as Wesley of the Red Marsh, the family held a small parcel of land that seemed to produce far more than its size should allow. The census taker noted with some suspicion that the family's vegetable garden remained green even in winter, and their single cow gave enough milk for a family twice their size. The Weasley gift for invention and magical tinkering first manifested during these medieval centuries. Family records speak of Wulfric Weasley, who lived during the reign of Henry II, creating the first self-stirring cauldron. It was a simple enchantment by modern standards, but revolutionary for its time. The cauldron would stir potions at exactly the right speed, adjusting for thickness and temperature without any intervention. This practical innovation, designed to make daily brewing easier rather than to gain fame or fortune, exemplified the Weasley approach to magic. As the medieval period progressed, the Weasleys established themselves as a fixture in England's magical community. They were never wealthy. Gold seemed to slip through their fingers like water, spent on helping neighbors or investing in impractical but fascinating magical experiments. They were never politically powerful. The games of ambition and influence held little appeal compared to the satisfaction of a well-tended garden or a clever charm that made housework easier. But they were known, respected, and genuinely liked, which would prove more valuable than gold or power in the centuries to come. The family's involvement with the early Wizengamot was limited but meaningful. When called upon to serve, Weasleys typically advocated for the common witch and wizard, arguing against regulations that would make life harder for those struggling to get by. Warwick Weasley, serving in 1289, famously opposed attacks on cauldron thickness, pointing out that poorer families couldn't afford the heavy-bedded cauldrons the law would require. His passionate speech, which included producing his grandmother's paper-thin but perfectly functional cauldron as evidence, swayed enough members to defeat the measure. The medieval Weasley approach to blood purity was refreshingly practical. While many pure-blood families were already beginning to obsess over their lineages, the Weasleys seemed to judge potential marriage partners by kindness, compatibility, and whether they laughed at the same jokes. Family records from this period show marriages to witches and wizards from all backgrounds, and even a few suspected marriages to particularly magical muggles, though such things were carefully not recorded in detail. The family's medieval legacy includes several lasting contributions to magical society. The Weasley woman charm, developed during the particularly harsh winter of 1348, could heat an entire dwelling with minimal magical energy. The charm's efficiency made it accessible to even the weakest magical folk, and variations of it still warm homes throughout magical Britain. They also developed early versions of what would become clock magic, creating timepieces that showed not just hours but the weather, the phase of the moon, and whether it was a good day for planting. As the medieval period drew to a close, the Weasleys had established patterns that would define them for centuries. Practical innovation, community service, financial struggle, and an unshakable belief that family bonds mattered more than gold or glory. They had survived plague, war, and political upheaval not through grand gestures or accumulated wealth, but through adaptation, kindness, and a seemingly endless capacity to find joy in life's simple pleasure. The transition from medieval to Renaissance would bring new challenges and opportunities, but the foundation was set. The Weasleys were survivors, inventors, and, above all, a family that understood that true wealth lay not in Gringotts vaults, but in the laughter around a dinner table and the knowledge that you would always have a place to call home. As we move into the Tudor period and beyond, the Weasley family tree begins to branch and flourish like the apple orchards they so carefully tended. The 16th through 18th centuries saw the family spread across Britain, each branch maintaining the core Weasley values, while developing their own unique contributions to magical society. The earliest clearly documented Weasley patriarch of this era was Caractacus Weasley, born in 1523 during the reign of Henry VIII. Caractacus embodied the Renaissance spirit of inquiry while maintaining the family's practical approach to magic. He spent his life documenting magical plants native to Britain, creating illustrated manuscripts that remained standard herbology references for centuries. His greatest discovery was the properties of dirigible thumbs, though his insistence that they enhanced acceptance of unusual ideas was met with skepticism by his contemporaries. Caractacus married Williamina Weatherwax, a talented witch from Somerset whose family specialized in weather magic. Their union brought new magical traditions into the Weasley line, though Williamina often laughed that her sophisticated weather predictions were no match for her father-in-law's trick of watching which way the gnomes ran in the morning. Together, they had 7 children, establishing the Weasley tradition of large families that would persist through the generation. Their eldest son, Bardolph Weasley, born in 1549, became the first Weasley to achieve significant academic recognition. He attended the newly established Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, where he excelled in transfiguration and arithmancy. After graduation, Bardolph returned to Devon, where he established a small school for local magical children who couldn't afford or manage the journey to Scotland. This informal academy, run from an expanded barn behind the Weasley home, operated for nearly 30 years and educated dozens of young witches and wizards who might otherwise have gone untrained. The Elizabethan era brought both opportunity and danger for magical families. The rise of witch hunts meant that even established families like the Weasleys had to be more careful about displaying their abilities. Prospero Weasley, Caractacus's 3rd son, responded to these challenges by becoming an expert in concealment charms. He developed many of the basic hiding spells that would later become standard for magical households, including the make-unmake-able charm that could cause muggle-made objects to malfunction in amusing but harmless ways, providing cover for accidental magic. During this period, the Weasleys also began their long association with magical transportation. Gertrude Weasley, born in 1571, showed an early fascination with flying. In an era when broomsticks were still crude and uncomfortable, she experimented with comfort charms and steering improvements. Her modified brooms never achieved the speed of racing models, but they could fly for hours without causing soreness, making them popular with magical midwives and healers who needed reliable transportation to remote areas. The 17th century saw the Weasley family weather the English Civil War and the Restoration, adapting to each change in power with their characteristic resilience. Cromwell Weasley, named before the Lord Protector made the name controversial, distinguished himself not through political maneuvering but by maintaining a neutral safe house where magical folk from both royalist and parliamentary sympathies could find shelter. His home, protected by ancient guest-right magic, became a template for magical sanctuaries in times of conflict. This period also saw the first recorded instance of the famous Weasley clock. Thessalonica Weasley, a remarkably gifted enchantress born in 1656, created the prototype while worrying about family members scattered by political upheaval. The clock showed not time but the location and status of each family member, home, traveling, working, in peril, and, rather optimistically, having tea. The enchantment required a deep magical connection between creator and subjects, limiting its replication, but the concept would be refined by future generations. The family's financial situation during these centuries remained consistently precarious, not through any lack of talent or effort, but through a combination of generosity, impractical investments, and an absolute inability to charge fair prices for their services. Sylvester Weasley, a skilled potteneer in the late 1600s, became legendary for accepting payment in vegetables, promises of future favors, and on one memorable occasion, a particularly talented singing toad. His wife, Prudence, managed to keep the family fed and housed through careful management and her own talent for stretching gold until it squeaked. The early 18th century brought the Age of Enlightenment, and with it, new opportunities for magical innovation. Alchemical Weasley, his parents were going through an experimental phase. Born in 1705, attempted to apply scientific principles to magic with mixed results. His efforts to calculate the exact magical energy required for household charms led to several explosions and one memorable incident where he accidentally gave consciousness to the family tea set. However, his work laid groundwork for later developments in magical theory, even if the tea set's philosophical debates during breakfast became rather tiresome. Marriage patterns during these centuries revealed the Weasley approach to family building. Unlike many pure-blood families who carefully negotiated marriages for political or financial advantage, Weasleys tended to marry for love, often to the despair of more ambitious relatives. They married magical merchants, talented herbologists, cheerful healers, and in one case that caused considerable family discussion, a squib who made the best treacle tart in 3 counties. These marriages brought new blood, new ideas, and new magical traditions into the family, strengthening rather than diluting their magical heritage. The Weasley approach to child rearing also distinguished them from their contemporaries. While many pure-blood families employed strict tutors and harsh discipline, Weasley children grew up in an atmosphere of benign chaos. They learned magic by helping with household charms, absorbed potion-making while assisting in the kitchen, and developed their flying skills in raucous family Quidditch matches, where the rules changed depending on who was winning. This practical, hands-on education produced witches and wizards who might not know the proper etiquette for a formal gathering, but could fix almost anything with a wand and a bit of ingenuity. Regional variations in the family began to appear during these centuries. The Devon Weasleys remained closest to their agricultural roots, developing new strains of magical plants and maintaining the old weatherworking traditions. A branch that settled in Yorkshire became known for their skill with magical creatures, particularly the breeding of unusually intelligent chickens, whose eggs had mild prophetic properties. The London Weasleys, adapting to urban life, specialized in space expansion charms and the delicate art of hiding magical households in plain sight among Muggle neighbors. Despite these regional differences, family gatherings remained important. The summer solstice gathering, held at the ancestral Devon property, brought together Weasleys from across Britain. These reunions featured enormous meals, with each branch contributing regional specialties, chaotic Quidditch matches, and the traditional midnight bonfire where family stories were shared and the names of new babies were added to the ancient family tapestry. The tapestry itself deserves mention. Unlike the pristine, formally maintained records of families like the Blacks, the Weasley family tapestry was a cheerful mess of additions, corrections, and marginal notes. Births were recorded in whatever color thread was handy. Marriages were connected by lines that sometimes had to curve around previous entries, and there was an entire section devoted to family pets that someone had decided deserved immortalization. Attempts to create a neater version always failed. The magic of the original resisted replication, as if the chaos itself was an essential part of the record. Notable women in the family tree during these centuries included Euphemia Weasley, who in 1689 invented a charm to keep hand-knitted items from unraveling, revolutionizing magical clothing production. Her daughter Celestina expanded on this work to create self-existing garments that would grow with children, saving countless galleons for large families. These practical innovations focused on making daily life easier rather than gaining fame, exemplified the Weasley contribution to magical society. The family's attitude toward house elves also set them apart. While they could never afford to employ house elves themselves, Weasleys who encountered them in other households invariably treated them with kindness and respect. Marcellus Weasley, visiting a wealthy cousin in 1723, caused a minor scandal by insisting on helping the house elves serve dinner, claiming that many hands made light work regardless of whose hands they were. This egalitarian attitude would be passed down through generations, eventually influencing later family members' involvement in creature rights. As the 18th century progressed, the Weasleys found themselves increasingly at odds with the growing blood purity movement among wealthy pureblood families. They were pureblood themselves, their magical lineage stretching back beyond reliable record-keeping, but they refused to see this as making them superior to anyone else. Cassius Weasley, invited to join the newly formed Sacred 28 Club in 1750, reportedly laughed so hard he fell off his chair, then asked if being sacred meant they'd help with his barn repairs. This rejection of pure blood supremacy came at a social cost. The Weasleys found themselves excluded from certain gatherings, their children sometimes snubbed at social events, and business opportunities mysteriously disappearing. Yet the family seemed remarkably unbothered by these slights. As Cassius's wife, Beatrice, famously said, "I'd rather have a small dinner with kind friends than a banquet with bores." The magical innovations continued throughout these centuries. The Weasleys contributed to nearly every field of magic, though rarely in ways that brought fame or fortune. They developed improved fertilizing charms that helped feed growing magical populations, created toys that could entertain children for hours without supervision, and refined household spells that made life easier for overworked parents. Each innovation was practical, accessible, and designed to help ordinary magical folk rather than impress academic circles. By the end of the 18th century, the Weasley family tree had grown into a magnificent, sprawling thing. Branches spread across Britain and began reaching into Ireland and Scotland. Some twigs had been lost to dragonpox, splinching accidents, or ill-advised experiments with untested potions. Others had married into different families, carrying Weasley values and ingenuity into new bloodlines. But the core remained strong, rooted in Devon's soil and nourished by generations of love, laughter, and loyalty. The family's economic situation remained perpetually precarious. Gringotts records from this period show a Weasley vault that rarely contained more than a few dozen galleons at any given time, yet somehow the family always managed. They grew their own food, made their own clothes, and maintained their properties through magic and determination, rather than hired help. What they lacked in gold, they made up for in resourcefulness, and an unshakable belief that happiness was more valuable than wealth. As the 19th century dawned, the Weasleys stood ready to face new challenges. The magical world was changing, becoming more regulated, more separated from Muggle society, more stratified by class and blood status. Yet the family entered this new era with the same qualities that had sustained them for centuries: adaptability, ingenuity, and an absolute refusal to take themselves too seriously. They had survived and thrived not by accumulating power or wealth, but by remembering what truly mattered: family, community, and the simple joy of a well-cast spell that made someone's day a little easier. The story of Septimus Weasley and Cedrella Black represents one of the most significant chapters in Weasley family history, a union that would shape the family's destiny through love, defiance, and courage in the face of prejudice. Their era, spanning the late 19th and early 20th centuries, coincided with massive upheavals in both the magical and Muggle worlds. Septimus Weasley was born in 1875, the third son of Arcturus and Lysandra Weasley. From his earliest days, Septimus displayed the classic Weasley traits: a cheerful disposition, natural magical talent, and an incomplete inability to accumulate wealth despite honest effort. He grew up in the family's Devon home, now somewhat run down but still filled with warmth and laughter. His childhood was marked by the usual Weasley chaos, exploding experiments in the garden shed, Quidditch matches where the goalposts occasionally wandered off, and family dinners where the food might spontaneously rearrange itself, but there was always enough for everyone. At Hogwarts, Septimus was sorted into Gryffindor, where he excelled in transfiguration and herbology, but showed the family's traditional struggle with subjects requiring strict precision like potions. His professors remembered him as a student who might forget his textbooks, but would never forget to help a struggling classmate. He was particularly noted for his ability to find humor in any situation, once famously turning a disastrous potions accident into an impromptu fireworks display that entertained the entire Great Hall. After leaving Hogwarts in 1893, Septimus tried his hand at various careers with mixed success. He worked briefly at the Ministry in the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office, where his genuine fascination with Muggle ingenuity sometimes overcame his duty to confiscate items. His supervisor's report noted that while Septimus was enthusiastic and well-meaning, he had an unfortunate tendency to improve upon the artifacts he was meant to be regulating. After accidentally creating a self-propelling tea service that terrorized the ministry cafeteria for 3 days, it was mutually agreed that his talents might be better employed elsewhere. Septimus found his calling in magical agriculture, developing improvements to crop-growing spells that helped small magical farmers compete with larger estates. His innovations never made him wealthy. He had the Weasley habit of sharing his discoveries freely rather than patenting them, but they earned him respect and friendship throughout rural magical Britain. By 1900, Septimus's soil sweetening solution was being used in magical gardens from Cornwall to the Scottish Highlands. It was at a Ministry agricultural exhibition in 1901 that Septimus first encountered Cedrella Black. She was everything he wasn't, elegant where he was rumpled, precise where he was chaotic. From one of the most ancient and wealthy pureblood families, while he had patches on his robes and mud under his fingernails. Yet something sparked between them over a display of magically enhanced turnips of all things. Cedrella had been born in 1884 into the main line of the House of Black, raised in number 12 Grimold Place, surrounded by dark artifacts, house elf heads, and the suffocating expectations of blood purity. From childhood, she had shown a rebellious streak that worried her parents. She asked uncomfortable questions about why their house elves couldn't be paid, why Muggleborns were considered inferior when they often performed magic just as well as purebloods, and why the family tree blasted off anyone who married inappropriately. Her years at Hogwarts, where she was naturally sorted into Slytherin, only strengthened her doubts about her family's ideology. She excelled academically, particularly in ancient runes and arithmancy, but she also observed that some of the brightest students were Muggle-born, that house elves were capable of powerful magic, and that many pure-blood supremacist beliefs simply didn't align with observable reality. She kept these thoughts carefully hidden, maintaining the perfect pure-blood daughter facade, while internally questioning everything she'd been taught. The attraction between Septimus and Cedrella developed slowly, carefully, in secret. They began meeting at magical academic conferences, supposedly by coincidence. Letters were exchanged through mutual friends, never directly. Their courtship took place in libraries researching cross-pollination of magical plants, in quiet corners of magical museums. In public places, where their interaction could be explained as professional courtesy. For Cedrella, Septimus represented everything her world told her to despise. He was poor, his family was considered blood traitors, and he had absolutely no interest in power or status. Yet he was also kind, genuinely funny, and treated her as an intellectual equal rather than a valuable pure-blood bride. He asked her opinion and actually listened to the answer. He made her laugh with his self-deprecating humor and his ability to find joy in simple things. He showed her a world where family meant love and support, rather than duty and expectation. For Septimus, Cedrella was a revelation. Her quick mind challenged him, her dry wit matched his more boisterous humor perfectly, and her courage in questioning her upbringing showed a strength he deeply admired. He saw past the black family name to the woman who sneaked food to house elves, who anonymously donated her allowance to some Mungo's charity ward, who read banned books about Muggle achievements and magical theory that challenged pure-blood supremacy. Their relationship remained secret for 3 years. During this time, the magical world around them was changing rapidly. Grindelwald was rising to power in Eastern Europe, preaching wizard supremacy. The international statute of secrecy was under strain as Muggle technology advanced. The old pure-blood families were closing ranks, becoming more insular and radical in their beliefs. Against this backdrop, a Weasley-Black union seemed impossible. The couple might have continued their secret relationship indefinitely, but history intervened. In 1904, Cedrella's parents arranged her betrothal to Lysander Yaxley, a wealthy pureblood 20 years her senior with documented Death Eater sympathies. Faced with this prospect, Cedrella made her choice. On a cold December evening, she left Grimold Place with only what she could carry, leaving behind a note that simply said, "I choose love over blood." She arrived at the Weasley home in Devon just as snow began to fall, her expensive robes incongruous against the cheerfully shabby surroundings. Septimus's parents, shocked but true to Weasley hospitality, welcomed her without question. His mother, Lysandra, immediately set about making tea and finding warm clothes, while his father, Arcturus, began planning how to protect them both from the Black family's inevitable retaliation. The marriage took place on Christmas Eve 1904, in the orchard behind the Weasley home. It was a small ceremony, just immediate family and a few brave friends who risked social censure to attend. Cedrella wore Lysandra's wedding robes, magically adjusted to fit, and wildflowers in her hair instead of the goblin-wrought tiara she would have worn as a black bride. The ceremony was performed by an elderly wizard who remembered when such unions weren't controversial, who believed that love mattered more than bloodlines. The Black family's response was swift and brutal. Cedrella was blasted off the family tapestry. Her name burned away as if she had never existed. Her inheritance was revoked, her possessions confiscated, and any Black who acknowledged her existence faced similar punishment. Howlers arrived daily at the Weasley home until Septimus developed a charm that transformed them into singing daffodils. Dark wizards made veiled threats, social invitations dried up, and business opportunities mysteriously vanished. Yet the young couple seemed remarkably unaffected by these trials. They settled into a small cottage on the Weasley property, expanded with enthusiasm if not expertise, resulting in rooms that were slightly different sizes and doors that occasionally opened onto the wrong locations. Cedrella adapted to her new life with remarkable grace, trading silk robes for practical wool, learning to cook without house elves, and discovering that she had a real talent for household charms that her privileged upbringing had never allowed her to explore. Their first child, Bilios, was born in 1906, followed by Arthur in 1907, and several others whose names were carefully recorded in the cheerful chaos of the Weasley family tapestry. Cedrella proved to be a devoted mother, combining the intellectual rigor of her black heritage with the warmth of her adopted family. She taught her children ancient runes alongside nursery rhymes, insisted on proper spell work while encouraging creative experimentation, and somehow managed to instill both discipline and joy in equal measure. The family's financial situation during this period was particularly strained. Cedrella's estrangement from the blacks meant no dowry or inheritance, while the social backlash affected Septimus's agricultural business. Yet they managed, through typical Weasley ingenuity. Cedrella used her excellent education to tutor local magical children, accepting payment in eggs, vegetables, and whatever else families could spare. Septimus expanded into experimental fertilizers that occasionally produced interesting results. The summer their tomatoes grew large enough to use as temporary shelters was particularly memorable. As the children grew, the household developed its own unique character. It combined the Weasley tradition of cheerful chaos with touches of Cedrella's more refined upbringing. Children might eat dinner using proper pureblood etiquette while their plates tap-danced across the table. Bedtime stories included both traditional black family legends, edited to remove the blood supremacist elements, and Weasley tales of clever farmers outwitting dark wizards. The approaching storm of Grindelwald's rise to power cast shadows over their domestic happiness. Septimus, now in his 40s, was too old for combat, but contributed by developing magical crops that could grow quickly in hidden locations, helping to feed those in hiding. Cedrella used her knowledge of dark magic, acquired through her black upbringing but never practiced, to develop defensive strategies against Grindelwald's followers. Their home became a quiet way station for those fleeing persecution. With Cedrella's ability to recognize dark artifacts and Septimus's talent for protective agriculture proving invaluable, the First World War, raging in the Muggle world, affected the magical community in unexpected ways. The Weasleys, with their long-standing acceptance of Muggleborns and half-bloods, found themselves helping magical families torn apart by Muggle conscription. Septimus developed charms to protect Muggle relatives of wizards serving in the trenches, while Cedrella organized care packages that included both practical supplies and carefully disguised protective amulets. Through all these trials, the love between Septimus and Cedrella only grew stronger. Visitors to their home noted how they still looked at each other with the wonder of new love, how they worked together with the seamless coordination of true partners. Their children grew up seeing that marriage could be a partnership of equals, that love could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles, and that choosing happiness over tradition was not only possible, but worthwhile. As their children reached Hogwarts age, both parents took active roles in their education. Septimus taught them the practical magic that would help them in daily life, while Cedrella ensured they understood the theoretical underpinnings that would let them excel academically. More importantly, they taught by example that blood purity meant nothing compared to kindness, that wealth was less valuable than family, and that standing up for one's beliefs was worth any sacrifice. The legacy of Septimus and Cedrella extended far beyond their immediate family. Their successful marriage, despite overwhelming opposition, became a symbol of hope for other couples facing similar prejudice. Young witches and wizards from traditional pure-blood families saw in Cedrella an example that it was possible to choose one's own path. Their home became a gathering place for progressive magical thinkers, contributing to the slow but steady erosion of blood prejudice in British magical society. In his later years, Septimus finally achieved modest financial success with a line of self-tending garden plots that allowed even the busiest witch or wizard to grow their own food. True to form, he insisted on keeping prices low enough that anyone could afford them, limiting profits but ensuring widespread adoption. The sight of a Weasley garden plot became common in magical backyards across Britain. each one a small testament to the family's commitment to helping others. Cedrella's contributions to magical theory, published under her married name despite attempts by pure-blood academics to ignore her work, advanced understanding of ancient magic significantly. Her perspective, combining intimate knowledge of dark magic with ethical opposition to its use, provided insights that helped develop new defensive strategies. Her monograph on the ethical implications of blood magic became required reading at Hogwarts, though her maiden name was carefully omitted from early editions. As the 1920s drew to a close, Septimus and Cedrella could look back on a life that had defied every expectation. They had chosen love over comfort, integrity over acceptance, and joy over security. Their children were growing into fine witches and wizards, carrying forward both the Weasley tradition of innovation and kindness and the black intelligence and determination purged of its dark associations. Their golden anniversary in 1954 was celebrated with a gathering that filled the expanded Weasley property. Witches and wizards from all walks of life came to honor a couple whose love had challenged prejudice and won. Even a few brave blacks attended, defying family tradition to acknowledge that Cedrella had chosen well. The party lasted 3 days, featured food that occasionally sang, fireworks that spelled out embarrassing family stories, and a general atmosphere of joy that neighbors said could be felt for miles. Septimus passed away peacefully in 1956, followed by Cedrella in 1958. They were buried side by side in the Weasley family plot, their headstones bearing the simple inscription, "They chose love." Their graves became something of a pilgrimage site for young couples facing family opposition, who would leave flowers and take courage from their example. Their true monument, however, was not in stone but in the lives they had shaped. Their son Arthur would carry forward their values, marrying a Pruitt and raising a family that would play crucial roles in defeating the darkest wizard of the age. The courage Cedrella had shown in defying her family would echo in generations of Weasleys who stood against prejudice and tyranny. The love that Septimus had offered unconditionally would become the foundation of a family whose warmth and loyalty would provide sanctuary for Harry Potter himself. In the end, Septimus and Cedrella's era was one of transformation. They took two ancient bloodlines, one known for poverty and kindness, the other for wealth and cruelty, and forged something new. They proved that love could overcome prejudice, that choosing happiness over tradition was not only possible, but necessary, and that the greatest inheritance parents could leave their children was not gold or status, but values and courage. And as Babel wasn't the only inheritance parents could leave their children, was not gold or status, but values and courage. Their story became woven into the very fabric of the Weasley identity, a reminder that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply choosing to love. Arthur Weasley entered the world on February 6, 1950, the second son of Septimus and Cedrella, born into a household where love was abundant even if gold was scarce. His earliest memories were of a home filled with magical experiments gone cheerfully wrong, where dinner conversations might range from ancient rune theory to the fascinating Muggle invention called a rubber duck, and where being different was not just accepted, but celebrated. The post-war wizarding world that Arthur grew up in was experiencing rapid change. The defeat of Grindelwald had ushered in an era of supposed enlightenment, yet old prejudices died hard. The Weasley family, already marked as blood traitors for Cedrella's marriage, found themselves further marginalized as they continued to advocate for Muggle-born rights and maintain friendships across blood status lines. Young Arthur absorbed these lessons naturally, seeing kindness and curiosity as strengths rather than weaknesses. Arthur's childhood was marked by an insatiable curiosity about how things worked. particularly anything involving Muggle technology. While his older brother Bilius showed traditional magical interests, Arthur could often be found in the shed behind their Devon home, carefully dissecting Muggle artifacts that had been confiscated and discarded by the Ministry. His father, amused and slightly bewildered by this interest, nonetheless encouraged it, helping Arthur set up what would become his first workshop at age 7. The workshop was a marvel of organized chaos. Shelves lined with batteries, which Arthur was convinced must contain some form of lightning, drawers full of screws and springs, and half-assembled Muggle devices in various states of modification. His proudest achievement at age 9 was successfully combining a Muggle bicycle with a mild levitation charm, creating a contraption that could hover 3 feet off the ground for nearly 10 minutes before the spells destabilized and deposited the rider gently in the vegetable garden. At Hogwarts, Arthur was sorted into Gryffindor like his father before him, though the Sorting Hat spent considerable time debating Ravenclaw due to his intellectual curiosity. His first years at school were marked by academic success in unexpected areas. While he struggled with subjects like potions that required precise measurements and patience, he excelled in transfiguration and charms, particularly when he could find ways to apply magical theory to his understanding of Muggle technology. His professors remembered him as an enthusiastic, if occasionally distracted, student. Professor McGonagall, then a young transfiguration teacher, noted that Arthur had successfully transfigured a mouse into a working music box, complete with tiny gears and springs, something that required not just magical ability, but a fundamental understanding of mechanical principles. His essays often included detailed diagrams comparing magical and Muggle approaches to solving problems, which either delighted or exasperated his teachers, depending on their own prejudices. Meanwhile, in Ottery St. Catchpole, a young witch named Molly Pruitt was growing up in a very different but equally loving household. Born on October 3, 1949, Molly was the younger sister to Fabian and Gideon, twin boys whose protective instincts toward their sister would shape her fierce maternal nature in years to come. The Pruitt family, while pure blood, shared the Weasleys' progressive views and had their own reputation for standing against the growing dark movement. Molly's childhood was dominated by the cheerful chaos of life, with twin brothers who seemed determined to test every boundary, magical and otherwise. She learned early to be quick with her wand, sharp with her tongue, and creative with her punishments. By age 6, she had developed a bat bogey hex that would later become legendary, first tested on Fabian when he tried to put flobberworms in her bed. The Pruitt household valued strength and loyalty above all else. Molly's mother, Lucretia, was a formidable witch who had served as an aura before retiring to raise her family. She taught Molly that being a witch meant more than just casting spells. It meant protecting those you loved, standing up for what was right, and never backing down from a fight that mattered. These lessons were reinforced by her brothers, who, despite their teasing, would hex anyone else who dared upset their sister. Molly arrived at Hogwarts in 1961, where she was immediately sorted into Gryffindor. She quickly established herself as someone not to be trifled with, despite her round face and warm smile. Her first-year dorm mates learned that while Molly would share her sweets, help with homework, and offer comfort during homesickness, she also wouldn't tolerate bullying, laziness, or cruelty. More than one older student learned the hard way that underestimating Molly Pruitt was a painful mistake. Her academic career was solid if not spectacular. She excelled in charms and defense against the dark arts, showing particular aptitude for protective spells and household magic. Her potions work was competent, her transfiguration acceptable, but it was in the practical applications of magic where she truly shone. Professor Flitwick noted that Miss Pruitt could cast a cleaning charm that would not only remove dirt, but organize belongings and repair minor damage simultaneously, a level of intent and control rare in students. Arthur and Molly's paths first crossed properly in 1966, during Arthur's 6th year and Molly's 5th. The encounter happened, appropriately enough, in a corridor where Arthur was attempting to magically modify a Muggle radio he had smuggled into school. The radio, protesting this treatment, was emitting a series of loud bangs and colourful sparks when Molly came across the scene. "What in Merlin's name are you doing?" she demanded, hands on her hips in a pose that would become familiar to future Weasley children. Arthur, soot-stained and grinning sheepishly, looked up from his malfunctioning project. "I'm trying to make it pick up the wizarding wireless network. I think if I can just adjust the frequency using a protean charm." "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard," Molly said, but she was already pulling out her wand. "You're going about it all wrong. Here, let me show you." What followed was an hour-long collaboration that resulted in a radio that could indeed pick up wizard broadcasts, though it occasionally interrupted programs with Muggle pop songs, which Arthur considered an improvement. More importantly, it was the beginning of a partnership that would last a lifetime. Their courtship was not the stuff of dramatic romance novels. Instead, it was built on shared study sessions where Molly helped Arthur focus on his NED while he made her laugh with increasingly elaborate magical modifications to everyday objects. It was long walks around the lake, discussing everything from their favorite Quidditch teams. Molly supported the Holyhead Harpies with fierce loyalty, while Arthur had a soft spot for the Chudley Cannons, to their dreams for the future. Arthur was drawn to Molly's strength, her unwavering sense of right and wrong, and the way she could make him feel both completely comfortable and slightly terrified. She laughed at his jokes, shared his values, and hexed a 7th-year Slytherin who made snide comments about Arthur's second-hand robes. She saw past his eccentricities to the kind, brilliant wizard beneath, and she made him want to be the man she already seemed to think he was. Molly, for her part, found in Arthur a kindness that complemented her strength. Where she could be quick to anger, he was endlessly patient. Where she worried, he found humour. His fascination with Muggles, which others mocked, showed her a mind that found wonder in everything. His treatment of house elves' portraits and even Peeves with courtesy and respect revealed a fundamental decency that her brothers, for all their protective instincts, recognized and approved of. Their relationship faced its first real test when Arthur graduated in 1968. He had accepted a position in the Ministry's Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office, a department considered a dead end by ambitious wizards, but perfect for someone with Arthur's unique interests. The salary was modest, the prospects for advancement minimal, but Arthur was genuinely excited about the work. Some of Molly's friends questioned whether she should tie herself to someone with so little ambition for power or wealth. The wizarding world was becoming increasingly dangerous, with rumors of a new dark wizard gathering followers. Wouldn't she be better off with someone who could provide security, status, protection? Molly's response to such suggestions was typically direct. "Arthur Weasley is worth 10 of those puffed-up peacocks in the other departments," she told her doormate, who had suggested she consider Bartemius Crouch, then a rising star in magical law enforcement. "He knows what really matters in life, and it isn't a fat Gringotts vault or a fancy title." The year Molly spent finishing her education while Arthur worked was challenging. They communicated through letters carried by an increasingly exhausted owl named Errol, who even in his youth showed a tendency to fly into windows. Arthur's letters were full of enthusiasm about his work. detailed descriptions of Muggle inventions he'd encountered, and increasingly creative ways of expressing his feelings that usually involved complex magical theory metaphors that made Molly laugh and cry simultaneously. Molly's final year was marked by increasing darkness in the wider world. Students arrived at school with stories of disappeared relatives, of dark marks appearing over homes, of a growing climate of fear. Her brothers, now working as auras, could tell her little, but their worried faces, when they thought she wasn't looking, said everything. The war that would define their generation was beginning, though few recognized it yet. Despite the gathering darkness, or perhaps because of it, Arthur proposed to Molly on a clear September evening in 1969, just after she'd graduated. He took her to the orchard behind his family's home, the same place where his parents had been married, and asked her to marry him with a ring that had been his grandmother's. Simple, beautiful, and charmed to grow warm when the wearer was thinking of their beloved. "I can't offer you wealth," he said honestly. "We'll probably always have to watch our knuts. I can't offer you power or status. You know what the wizarding world thinks of the Weasleys. But I can offer you love, laughter, and a lifetime of adventures. I promise to always make you smile, to stand by you through whatever comes, and to never stop finding wonder in the world." Molly Pruitt, will you marry me? Molly's yes was immediate and emphatic, followed by a kiss that set off the fireworks Arthur had hopefully prepared just in case. The celebration that followed involved both families and lasted well into the night, with Septimus and Cedrella welcoming Molly with joy, seeing in her the same strength and courage that had brought them together. They came to their wedding, held on a crisp November day in 1969, was a modest affair by pure-blood standards, but rich in joy and meaning. The ceremony took place at the Burrow, which Arthur had been working to restore as their future home. The building, crooked and patched with magic, had been in the Weasley family for generations, and Arthur had spent months making it habitable, with Molly's enthusiastic help. The guest list reflected their values. Blood status was irrelevant, but kindness was essential. Muggle-born friends from Hogwarts mixed with pure-blood relatives who shared their progressive views. Fabian and Gideon served as Arthur's groomsmen, having declared him officially worthy of their sister after he'd helped them perfect a particularly complex defensive ward. The ceremony was performed by an elderly wizard who had married Arthur's parents, bringing the story full circle. Molly wore her mother's wedding robes, modified with her own touches, protective charms sewn into the hem, pockets spelled to be larger on the inside, because a practical witch always needs pockets, and tiny snitches embroidered on the sleeves in honor of their shared love of Quidditch. Arthur wore new robes for possibly the first time in his life, a gift from his parents who had saved for months to afford them. The reception featured food prepared by Molly herself with help from her mother and new mother-in-law. The wedding cake, a magnificent creation that occasionally sprouted sugar flowers that flew away as butterflies, was Cedrella's contribution, showing off the decorative charm work she'd learned as a black but rarely had occasion to use. Dancing went on until dawn, with Arthur's Muggle music box providing waltz music that occasionally turned into swing, keeping everyone on their toes. As the sun rose on their first day as husband and wife, Arthur and Molly stood in the doorway of the Burrow, looking out at their future. The house needed work, lots of work. The garden was overgrown, the ghoul in the attic was particularly vocal, and they had exactly enough gold in their Gringotts vault to last perhaps 2 months if they were careful. But they had each other, they had their wands, and they had the boundless optimism of youth. The wizarding world might be growing darker, their families might be considered odd at best and blood traitors at worst, but in that moment, with the morning sun painting the Devon Hills gold, and the scent of breakfast beginning to waft from the kitchen where Molly was already experimenting with her new stove. Life was perfect. Their youth had prepared them well for what was to come. Arthur's curiosity and kindness, Molly's strength and fierce protectiveness, their shared values and unshakable love. These would be the foundations on which they would build a family that would help save the wizarding world. But that morning, they were simply Arthur and Molly Weasley, young and in love, ready to face whatever the future might bring, as long as they could face it together. The early years of their marriage would test them in ways they couldn't imagine. The birth of their children, the escalation of the war, the loss of Molly's brothers, all lay ahead. But the foundation built in their youth, strengthened by their family's examples and their own choices, would prove strong enough to weather any storm. They had chosen love over fear, hope over despair, and family over fortune. In the Weasley tradition stretching back centuries, they had chosen well. The autumn of 1970 brought the first frost to Ottery St. Catchpole, and with it the news that would transform Arthur and Molly Weasley from a young married couple into parents. Molly discovered she was pregnant on a grey October morning when the smell of Arthur's favourite kippers sent her racing for the bathroom. By evening, after a visit to St. Mungo's that confirmed their hopes, the couple sat in their cosy kitchen at the Burrow, hands clasped across the table, marvelling at how their lives were about to change. The Burrow itself seemed to sense the impending arrival. Rooms that had been stubbornly drafty suddenly sealed themselves. The stairs, previously treacherous with odd angles and unexpected drops, smoothed out as if preparing for tiny feet. Even the ghoul in the attic quieted his clanking, though whether from consideration or shock no one could say. Arthur threw himself into preparation with characteristic enthusiasm. His workshop became a nursery in progress, filled with half-assembled cribs that rocked themselves, mobiles that played different lullabies based on the baby's mood, and a changing table he was attempting to charm to handle the messy bits automatically. Molly, finding him one evening covered in paint and tangled in what appeared to be self-knitting baby booties, gently suggested that perhaps some things were better done the traditional way. "But Molly Wobbles," Arthur protested, using the pet name that never failed to make her smile. "Think of how much time we'll save if the nappies change themselves. And think of how much trouble we'll be in if your charm goes wrong and we end up with nappies flying around the house," Molly countered, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Besides, there's something to be said for doing things by hand. It's how we show love." This philosophy would come to define their parenting style: magic where helpful, but always grounded in personal attention and care. As Molly's pregnancy progressed, they found a rhythm that balanced Arthur's innovative enthusiasm with Molly's practical wisdom. The nursery that emerged was a perfect blend. Walls painted by hand but charmed to show gentle moving clouds. A crib built by Arthur but with bedding sewn by Molly, and a rocking chair that could rock itself but usually held Molly as she knitted tiny jumpers. William Arthur Weasley arrived on November 29, 1970, during one of the worst snowstorms in decades. Arthur had planned multiple routes to St. Mungo's, but when Molly's labour began, none of them were viable. The flu network was down due to the storm, apparition was too risky in Molly's condition, and their battered Ford Anglia, Arthur's first successful integration of Muggle machinery and magic, chose that moment to develop a suspicious cough. In the end, Bill was born at the Burrow, delivered by Molly's mother with Arthur assisting. The moment the baby's cries filled the house, the storm began to clear, as if nature itself was welcoming this new life. Bill emerged into the world with a shock of red hair and his mother's determined chin. immediately capturing his parents' hearts completely. "He's perfect," Arthur whispered, tears streaming down his face as he held his son for the first time. "Of course he is," Molly replied, exhausted but radiant. "He's a Weasley." Bill's early months established patterns that would repeat with variations for all the Weasley children. He was a good baby, alert and curious, with an early fascination for anything shiny or magical. Arthur's workshop had to be thoroughly baby-proofed after Bill somehow managed to summon a set of enchanted screwdrivers to his crib at 4 months old. Molly discovered she had a natural talent for managing on little sleep, developing a sixth sense for when Bill needed her that bordered on the supernatural. The wider wizarding world during Bill's infancy was growing increasingly dark. The Daily Prophet carried stories of disappearances, of dark marks appearing over homes, of a wizard calling himself Lord Voldemort gathering followers. Arthur's work at the ministry brought him into contact with increasingly disturbing enchanted objects, items cursed to harm muggles in cruel and creative ways. He began working longer hours, not for advancement, but because he felt a responsibility to protect innocent people from magical threats they couldn't understand or defend against. Molly, home with baby Bill, felt the war's pressure differently. Shopping trips to Diagon Alley became tense affairs, with auras patrolling and shops closing early. Old friends disappeared without explanation, and new faces at the market were viewed with suspicion. She began developing the protective instincts that would later become legendary, warding the burrow with every defensive spell she knew and a few she invented. Despite the darkness gathering outside, or perhaps because of it, the Weasley home remained a beacon of warmth and normalcy. Bill took his first steps in the kitchen, chasing the enchanted mop as it cleaned. His first word was, "Up!" usually accompanied by imperious pointing at whatever had caught his attention. By his first birthday, he was a confident toddler with his father's curiosity and his mother's determination. The decision to have another child in such uncertain times wasn't made lightly, but as Arthur and Molly discussed one evening after Bill was asleep, they refused to let fear dictate their lives. "If we wait for the world to be safe, we might wait forever," Molly said, her knitting needles clicking as she worked on what would become a blanket for their next child. "And besides," Arthur added, adjusting his glasses as he tinkered with a muggle telephone, "Bill needs siblings. Every child deserves the chaos of a large family." Charlie arrived on December 12, 1972, with considerably less drama than his older brother. By now, the burrow was well prepared for babies, and the journey to St. Mungo's went smoothly. Charlie was a robust baby from the start, with a loud cry and a grip that suggested a future beater. Where Bill had been curious and alert, Charlie was physical and adventurous, attempting to climb before he could properly walk. The two boys developed an immediate bond. Bill, not quite 2, appointed himself Charlie's protector and entertainment committee. He would sit by Charlie's crib for hours, showing him toys and chattering in the double tongue of toddlers. Charlie, for his part, seemed happiest when his big brother was nearby, his face lighting up whenever Bill appeared. Managing 2 young children while the wizarding world grew progressively more dangerous tested Arthur and Molly in new ways. Arthur installed additional protective charms around the property, including some technically illegal ones that he justified as necessary for his family's safety. Molly developed a routine that maximized efficiency. She could nurse Charlie, help Bill with his breakfast, and prepare Arthur's lunch simultaneously, her wand conducting a symphony of domestic tasks. The financial pressure of a growing family on Arthur's modest ministry salary became increasingly apparent. Hand-me-downs, already a fact of life, became an art form. Molly learned to transform Bill's outgrown clothes into perfect fits for Charlie, adding embellishments to make them feel new. Toys were mended and remended, held together by magic and parental love. The vegetable garden expanded, and Molly became expert at stretching meals to feed any number of unexpected guests who might need sanctuary. Percy Ignatius Weasley joined the family on August 22, 1976, and from the beginning he was different from his brothers. Where Bill was adventurous and Charlie was physical, Percy was methodical. He rarely cried, seeming to observe the world with serious eyes that suggested he was taking notes for future reference. His first toy preference was for blocks, which he would stack with obsessive precision, becoming distressed if they were knocked over before he was finished. "This one's going to be the Minister for Magic," Arthur joked, watching 6-month-old Percy carefully categorize his toys by size and color. "Don't joke about that," Molly replied, but she was smiling. "Though I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up running something. He's got that look about him." The dynamic between the three boys fascinated their parents. Bill naturally took charge, organizing games and adventures with the confidence of an eldest child. Charlie followed enthusiastically, always ready for whatever his brother suggested. Percy participated on his own terms, often trying to impose rules on games that his brothers cheerfully ignored. The resulting conflicts taught Molly advanced peacekeeping skills that would serve her well in years to come. The announcement of Molly's fourth pregnancy in early 1978 came with mixed emotions. The war was escalating. Fabienne and Gideon were involved in increasingly dangerous missions they couldn't discuss, and money was tighter than ever. But the Weasley optimism prevailed, and preparations began for another addition to their growing family. "How do you think we'll manage 4? Arthur asked one evening, looking around the Burrows' living room, where toys seemed to multiply spontaneously and Percy was attempting to build a tower while Charlie used the blocks as dragon eggs. "The same way we managed 3, Molly replied, her hands automatically moving to prevent Bill from climbing the bookshelf. "With love, magic, and a good deal of shouting." The surprise came at St. Mungo's on April 1, 1978, when the healer cheerfully announced, "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, you have healthy twin boys." Arthur fainted. Molly, despite having just delivered twins, managed to revive him with a well-placed Egwenement's charm, and her exasperated, "Honestly, Arthur, I did all the work and you're the one unconscious." Fred and George entered the world as they would live in it, together and causing chaos. Fred arrived first, followed 3 minutes later by George, and from that moment they seemed to operate as 2 halves of one mischievous whole. They cried in harmony, slept in synchronization, and managed to communicate through means their parents couldn't fathom. The logistics of managing 5 children under 8 would have defeated lesser parents. The burrow expanded again, new rooms appearing through magical architecture that defied conventional physics. The kitchen table grew longer, the washing line multiplied, and Molly developed the ability to be in 3 places simultaneously through sheer maternal willpower. Bill rose to the challenge of being the eldest of 5 with remarkable grace. At nearly 8, he appointed himself deputy parent, helping with feedings and changings without being asked. Charlie, now 5, was fascinated by the twins, declaring them, "Like dragons, double trouble." Percy, precise even at 2, was initially disturbed by the chaos the twins brought, but soon developed his own role as the one who noticed when they were planning something particularly destructive. The twins' first year was marked by mysterious incidents that suggested they had inherited the Weasley innovative spirit in double measure. Toys would appear in their crib that had been locked in cupboards. They seemed capable of switching positions in their sleep, causing endless confusion about which twin was which. By 6 months, They had figured out how to work together to escape any containment their parents devised. "I swear they're doing magic already," Molly said one morning, finding the twins had somehow covered their nursery walls with moving handprints. "Accidental magic this young," Arthur mused, studying the prints with professional interest. "And coordinated between two children? Fascinating." "Fascinating is not the word I'd use," Molly replied, already working to clean the walls while preventing the twins from adding more prints. The financial strain of 7 Weasleys living on one ministry salary reached critical levels. Arthur took on additional work, helping other departments with Muggle problems. Molly performed miracles with their budget, making meals that were filling and nutritious if not fancy. The children never felt poor, though the house was rich with laughter, creativity, and the kind of chaos that made every day an adventure. The shadow of the war crept closer to their domestic happiness. In 1979, the unthinkable happened. Fabian and Gideon Pruitt were killed by Death Eaters, fighting heroically but ultimately overwhelmed. Molly's grief was devastating, made worse by the need to remain strong for her children. Arthur held her through the nights when the children were asleep, and she could finally cry for her beloved brothers. The funeral was a stark reminder of the war's cost. Bill, old enough to understand, watched his mother with worried eyes. Charlie stayed close to his father's side. Percy organized his toys obsessively, seeking control in a world suddenly uncertain. The twins, too young to understand death, nonetheless sensed the sadness and were unusually quiet. "Demi died as they lived," Molly said weeks later, holding Fabian's watch, all that had been recovered, protecting others, fighting for what was right. She would pass that watch to Harry Potter years later, but for now she kept it close, a reminder of loss and courage in equal measure. Despite the grief, life continued. Children needed feeding, clothes needed washing, and the garden needed tending. The Weasleys found solace in routine and in each other. Bill started showing magical ability, accidentally turning Charlie's toy dragon different colors during an argument. Charlie demonstrated his future passion by attempting to adopt every creature he found, from garden gnomes to what he insisted was a baby dragon, but was actually a common lizard with delusions of grandeur. The announcement of another pregnancy in early 1980 was met with a mixture of joy and concern. 6 children during wartime seemed almost reckless. But, as Molly pointed out, we can't let them win by being too afraid to live. Ronald Bilius Weasley arrived on March 1st, 1980, entering a family already in full swing. His brothers greeted him with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Bill, now 9, was protective. Charlie wanted to know if he was dragon-proof. Percy asked about proper baby-holding technique, and the twins immediately began planning how to include him in their schemes. Ron's defining characteristic from the start was his determination to keep up with his brothers. He watched them with intense focus, as if memorizing their moves for future reference. His first crawl was toward the twins' toy box. His first word was mine, usually referring to something belonging to someone else. And his first magical incident involved summoning one of Percy's meticulously organized books, much to Percy's horror. "He's going to be trouble, this one," Arthur observed, watching baby Ron attempt to climb out of his crib to follow his brothers. "They're all trouble," Molly replied fondly, "just different varieties of it." The dynamic of 6 boys created a cheerful chaos that defined the burrow. Mornings were symphonies of slamming doors, shouted conversations, and at least one minor catastrophe before breakfast. Molly developed a command voice that could cut through any noise, and an organizational system that would have impressed a military quartermaster. Arthur learned to perform rapid repairs on everything from broken toys to damaged walls, often while simultaneously preventing the twins from implementing their latest experiment. The family's poverty during this period was very real, but somehow never felt desperate. They had love, laughter, and each other. Clothes were patched and repatched until they consisted more of patches than original fabric. Meals were creative interpretations of whatever was available. Birthday presents were often homemade but crafted with such love that they became treasured possessions. Bill, as the eldest, felt the weight of responsibility keenly. He helped without being asked, corralled his younger brothers with patient authority, and showed a maturity beyond his years, but he was still a child. And Molly made sure he had time to be one, arranging special outings just for him when the younger boys were occupied. Charlie developed his passion for creatures into a defining personality trait. The garden became a sanctuary for injured birds, displaced gnomes, and anything else Charlie decided needed protecting. His gentleness with animals contrasted sharply with his rough-and-tumble approach to brotherhood, creating a fascinating duality that would characterize him into adulthood. Percy's need for order in the chaos of a large family became more pronounced. He created schedules that no one followed, rules that everyone ignored, and systems that the twins took particular delight in circumventing. Yet his brothers, for all their teasing, were fiercely protective of him, recognizing that Percy's difference was just another form of Weasley individuality. The twins were forces of nature unto themselves. By age 3, they had developed their own language, their own moral code, largely focused on maximum amusement, and an uncanny ability to be in the worst possible place at the most inconvenient time. Yet they were also incredibly loyal, protective of their younger brother Ron, and capable of moments of surprising sweetness. Ron, the baby of the boys, developed a personality that was part determination to match his brothers, part resentment at always being last, and part unique Weasley charm. He learned early that making people laugh got attention, that being brave earned respect, and that having 5 older brothers meant always having someone to look up to, and someone to blame. As 1980 drew to a close, the Weasley family was complete, except for one final addition. The house was full to bursting, the budget was stretched beyond recognition, and the war showed no signs of ending. Yet, in their cramped, chaotic, loving home, they had created something precious, a sanctuary of normalcy in an increasingly dark world. The foundation was set for all that would come. These children, raised with love if not luxury, with values if not wealth, would grow to play crucial roles in the fate of the wizarding world. But for now, they were simply the Weasley boys, fighting over toys, planning pranks, protecting each other, and driving their parents to distraction and delight in equal measure. September 1, 1982, dawned crisp and clear, a perfect day for new beginnings. At the Burrow, chaos reigned as the Weasley family prepared for a momentous occasion, Bill's departure for Hogwarts. Molly had been up since dawn, checking and rechecking his trunk, while Arthur attempted to corral the younger children, who seemed determined to either stow away with their brother or dismantle his luggage in search of treasures. "Mum, you've checked my socks 4 times, Bill said, trying to project 11-year-old dignity while secretly appreciating the fussing. "Well, you could never have too many socks," Molly replied, blinking back tears she refused to let fall until after the train departed. "And remember, if you need anything at all, you just send Errol." "Maybe not Errol," Arthur suggested gently, watching their ancient owl fly into a wall. Perhaps one of the school owls would be more reliable. The journey to King's Cross was an adventure in itself. The Ford Anglia, magically expanded but still protesting the weight of 7 Weasleys and a trunk, wheezed through London traffic while the twins provided commentary that had even Percy giggling. Charlie spent the journey giving Bill advice about dragons that might or might not exist in the Forbidden Forest, while Ron, barely 2, seemed to understand that something important was happening and clung to Bill's hand with sticky determination. Platform 9 3/4 provided Bill's first real glimpse of the wider wizarding world. The Scarlet steam engine, the crowds of magical families, the owls hooting and cats weaving between legs. It was overwhelming and exhilarating. He stood a little straighter, trying to look like he belonged, while internally memorizing every detail to share with his brothers. "Now remember," Molly said, straightening his robes one last time. "Write to us after the sorting. Be polite to your teachers, don't let anyone bully you, eat properly, and—" "Molly," Arthur interrupted gently, "he'll be fine. Won't you, Bill?" Bill nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He hugged each brother in turn, Charlie with enthusiasm, Percy with formal precision, the twins together in a giggling mass, and Ron with gentle care. His hug with his mother lasted longest. Her whispered, "I'm so proud of you," carrying him onto the train with confidence. The Sorting Hat's decision came quickly, "Gryffindor!" and Bill felt a surge of relief and pride. His first letter home, written that very night, was filled with wonder. The ceiling that showed the sky, ghosts that floated through walls, food that appeared from nowhere, and staircases that moved. He wrote separate messages to each brother, knowing his mother would read them aloud. Dragon facts for Charlie, library details for Percy, prank possibilities for the twins, and a promise to Ron that Hogwarts would wait for him. Bill's years at Hogwarts were marked by excellence, both academic and social. He discovered an aptitude for defense against the dark arts that surprised everyone, including himself. His charms work was exceptional, and he showed a particular talent for curse breaking that would shape his future career. But perhaps more importantly, he developed the leadership skills that came naturally to an eldest child of a large family. By his 3rd year, Bill was helping younger students with homework, organizing study groups and mediating disputes with the patient authority of someone used to managing multiple younger brothers. His professors noticed his ability to bring out the best in others, his charm that worked on everyone from first-year Hufflepuffs to 7th-year Slytherins. "Your brother," Professor McGonagall would later tell Charlie, had a gift for making everyone feel included. He could have been exclusive, handsome, talented, popular, but he chose kindness instead. Meanwhile, at the Burrow, life continued its chaotic rhythm, with one less voice at the dinner table. Charlie's anticipation for his own Hogwarts journey grew with each of Bill's letters. He practiced spells with twigs from the garden, studied every creature he could find, and peppered his older brother with questions during holidays about care of magical creatures classes. September 1, 1984, arrived with Charlie practically vibrating with excitement. His trunk had been packed for weeks, despite Molly's attempts to convince him he might need access to his clothes before September. The journey to King's Cross was both easier and harder than Bill's. Easier because they knew what to expect. Harder because Charlie kept attempting to bring along various creatures he'd rescued over the summer. "No, Charlie, you cannot bring the garden snake," Molly said firmly, discovering his attempted stowaway. "They have plenty of creatures at Hogwarts." "But Herbert needs me," Charlie protested, carefully returning the snake to the garden with whispered promises to write. Bill, now a confident third year, met them at the platform with the easy assurance of someone who belonged. He introduced Charlie to several friends, all of whom had heard extensive stories about his dragon-obsessed brother. Charlie, for once, was speechless with awe, taking in the magnificent steam engine and the crowd of magical families. The sorting hat took longer with Charlie than it had with Bill, debating between Gryffindor and Hufflepuff. Charlie's loyalty and hard-working nature pulled toward the Badgers, but his courage and determination won out. "Gryffindor," the hat announced, and Charlie's face split into a grin that could have lit the Great Hall without candles. Charlie's Hogwarts career was defined by two passions: magical creatures and Quidditch. He discovered the latter almost by accident, trying out for the team on a dare from Bill and revealing a natural talent for flying that surprised everyone, including himself. By his second year, he was Gryffindor's Seeker, small and quick, with reflexes honed by years of catching escaped creatures at the Burrow. His relationship with Rubeus Hagrid began his first week when Charlie was caught sneaking toward the Forbidden Forest to see if there really were dragons. Instead of detention, Hagrid found himself with an enthusiastic assistant for care of magical creatures preparation. Charlie's genuine love for all creatures, from the beautiful to the dangerous to the simply odd, endeared him to the half-giant immediately. "Never seen a student so taken with creatures," Hagrid would tell anyone who listened. "Reminds me of myself at that age. Except he's got more sense about which ones'll kill ya." Back at the Burrow, Percy was preparing for his own eventual departure with characteristic thoroughness. At 7, he had already created a comprehensive list of required reading, organized by subject and cross-referenced by importance. He interrogated both Bill and Charlie during holidays, taking notes on everything from castle layout to professor preferences. The twins, now 6, had different plans entirely. They viewed their brother's departure as opportunities to rifle through abandoned belongings and claim bedroom territory. Their magical accidents were increasing in both frequency and creativity. Molly found them one morning having successfully turned all of Percy's carefully organized books into singing butterflies. "How did you even do that?" she asked, torn between exasperation and impressed amazement. "Dunno," they replied in unison, their innocent expressions fooling no one. Ron, at 4, felt the absence of his older brothers keenly. He took to following Percy around, much to Percy's alternating delight and annoyance. His hero worship of Bill and Charlie grew with each holiday visit, their Hogwarts stories taking on mythical proportions in his young mind. The announcement of Molly's pregnancy in early 1981 had been met with varying reactions. Bill, home for Christmas, immediately offered to help more during holidays. Charlie wondered if the baby would like dragons. Percy reorganized his room to demonstrate his responsibility. The twins began planning pranks to play on a younger sibling. Ron was simply confused about where babies came from and why they needed another one. Ginevra Molly Weasley arrived on August 11, 1981, the first girl born to the Weasley line in generations. The effect on the household was immediate and profound. Arthur cried openly, holding his tiny daughter like spun glass. Molly, exhausted but triumphant, watched her boys meet their sister with a mixture of amusement and maternal pride. Bill, almost 11, held Ginny with the practiced ease of an eldest child, but his expression was softer than with his brothers. "Hello, little sister," he whispered. "I'm going to teach you everything I know." Charlie peered at the baby with intense interest. "She's very small. Are you sure she's not part fairy? Oh, do you think she'll like dragons?" Percy adjusted his glasses and consulted the parenting book he'd borrowed from the library. It says here that baby sisters require special consideration. We'll need to modify our noise levels and ensure her developmental needs are met. The twins' reaction was perhaps the most surprising. They approached their sister with unusual gentleness, Fred reaching out to touch her tiny hand, while George made silly faces trying to make her smile. "We'll teach her all the best pranks," they promised solemnly. Ron, not quite 18 months old, seemed puzzled by all the fuss. He toddled over to peer at the baby, declared, "Mine!" and attempted to share his stuffed dragon, establishing a protective instinct that would last a lifetime. September 1, 1987, saw Percy's departure for Hogwarts with considerably more organization than his brother's journeys. His trunk was packed with military precision, every item labeled and categorized. He had corresponded with Hogwarts Library over the summer, requesting a reading list to censure adequate preparation. He wore his new robes with a dignity that made him look older than his 11 years. "Now, Percy," Arthur said gently at the platform, "remember that Hogwarts is about more than just academic achievement. Make friends, have fun, enjoy yourself." "Fun can be educational too," Percy replied seriously, then softened at his father's concerned expression. "I'll try, Dad, I promise." Percy sorting into Gryffindor surprised some who had expected Ravenclaw, but those who knew him well understood. Beneath his rule-following exterior beat the heart of someone who would stand up for what was right. Even if it meant challenging authority, he just preferred to do so with proper documentation and following correct procedures. His first letter home was notably different from his brother's. Where Bill had written of wonder and Charlie of creatures, Percy provided detailed analysis of teaching methods, curriculum structure, and library organization. He did, however, include a postscript admitting that the moving staircases were quite extraordinary, though potentially inefficient for punctual arrival to classes. Percy found his niche at Hogwarts not in Quidditch or creature handling, but in academics and leadership. He excelled in every subject through sheer determination and hard work, earning respect from professors who appreciated his diligence. His classmates initially found him pompous, but gradually discovered that Percy would help anyone who asked, staying up late to explain transfiguration theory or proper wand movements. The year 1989 brought the most anticipated and feared Hogwarts departure yet, the twins. The entire family approached September 1st with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Bill, now working his first year as a cursebreaker for Gringotts, took time off to see them off. "Remember," he told them seriously, "Hogwarts has been standing for 1,000 years. Try not to blow it up in your first week." "We make no promises," Fred replied cheerfully. "But we'll try to save the explosions for second week," George added. Charlie, in his final year and Quidditch captain, had already written to his team, warning them about his brothers. Percy, now a third year and aspiring prefect, had prepared a list of school rules with particular emphasis on those the twins were most likely to break. The journey to King's Cross was unusually subdued, mainly because Molly had threatened to send the twins to Hogwarts with Mrs. Pringle's niece if they caused any chaos before reaching the platform. They maintained angelic behavior until the moment they crossed the barrier, then immediately began plotting which compartment would be best for testing their latest invention. The Sorting Hat faced its greatest challenge yet, with Fred and George. They insisted on being sorted together, arguing that they were functionally one person in two bodies. When told this was impossible, they each whispered something to the hat that made it laugh, a sound that startled the entire Great Hall. "Gryffindor," it announced for Fred, who high-fived his brother on the way to the table. "Gryffindor," it repeated for George, who bowed dramatically to applause from their new housemates. The twins' Hogwarts career began as it would continue, with innovation, chaos, and an uncanny ability to push boundaries without quite breaking them. Their first week saw 3 explosions. They'd promised Bill to wait until the second week but claimed different time zones, the discovery of 2 secret passages, and the development of their first successful Hogwarts product, canary creams that temporarily turned the eater into a large canary. Their professors quickly learned that separating the twins was futile. They communicated through methods that defied explanation. Detentions were ineffective as punishment since they viewed them as opportunities for experimentation. The only thing that worked was appealing to their sense of fairness and their genuine desire not to hurt anyone with their pranks. "They're brilliant," Professor Flitwick told Molly during a parent conference. "Absolutely brilliant. Their charm work is intuitive in ways I've rarely seen. If we can just channel that creativity constructively." "Good luck with that," Molly replied dryly. "I've been trying for 11 years. Back at the Burrow, the house felt strangely quiet, with only Ron and Ginny at home. Ron, now 9, oscillated between enjoying the attention and missing the chaos. He spent hours flying on Charlie's old broom, practicing Quidditch moves he'd seen his brothers perform, dreaming of the day he'd join them at Hogwarts. Ginny, at 8, was developing her own distinct personality. Surrounded by brothers her whole life, she was fearless, outspoken, and determined not to be left behind. She stole Ron's broom when he wasn't looking, teaching herself to fly by sheer determination. She practiced jinxes on the garden gnomes, read every one of Bill's old textbooks, and wrote letters to her brothers that mixed family news with pointed questions about defensive spells. "She's going to be trouble," Arthur observed one evening, watching Ginny successfully perform a bat bogey hex on a particularly aggressive gnome. "She's going to be magnificent," Molly corrected, pride evident in her voice. September 1, 1991 brought 2 significant departures. Ron, finally 11, could barely contain his excitement. His second-hand robes and Charlie's old wand didn't dampen his enthusiasm. He was finally going to join his brothers. The platform was crowded with Weasleys as the whole family turned out to see him off. But the real excitement came from an unexpected source. Harry Potter was on the platform. The boy who lived, legend and overwhelmed, by the magical world he'd just discovered. Molly's maternal instincts kicked in immediately, helping him find the platform and fussing over him as if he were one of her own. Ron's friendship with Harry began on the train, bonding over sweets and wizard cards, complaints about older brothers and dreams of Quidditch glory. By the time they reached Hogwarts, they were fast friends, and Ron's letters home were full of Harry this and Harry that, the famous boy who was actually just a boy, who laughed at Ron's jokes and shared his sweets, and didn't care that Ron's robes were second-hand. The Sorting Hat placed Ron in Gryffindor without hesitation, and his whoop of joy echoed through the Great Hall. His first year would bring adventures none of them could have imagined. Trolls and 3-headed dogs, life-size chess and courage found in desperate moments. But that first night, he was simply Ron Weasley, 6th of 7, finally where he belonged. Percy was made prefect that year, his chest puffed with pride, as he showed his badge to anyone who stood still long enough. His younger brother's reactions varied. Bill sent congratulations. Charlie sent condolences. The twins immediately began planning prefect-specific pranks, and Ron rolled his eyes, but was secretly proud. The twins, now in their 3rd year, had hit their stride. Their invention of the Marauders map, discovered rather than created, though they'd never admitted, gave them unprecedented freedom to explore and experiment. Their pranks became more elaborate, their products more sophisticated. They began what would become Weasley's Wizard's Wheezes in the abandoned classroom they'd claimed as their laboratory. Ginny, alone at the Burrow for the first time, threw herself into preparation for her own Hogwarts journey. She practiced spells with her mother, helped with increasingly complex household magic, and wrote daily letters to her brothers. Her correspondence with Ron often included messages for Harry, whom she'd developed a massive crush on after their brief meeting at the platform. The Christmas of 1991 was particularly special, with Ron staying at Hogwarts with Harry. Molly knitted Harry a Weasley jumper, officially inducting him into the family in the most fundamental way she knew. The other boys came home to find Ginny practically vibrating with questions about Harry Potter, which they answered with varying degrees of teasing and truth. As the years progressed, each Weasley child carved out their own niche at Hogwarts. Bill had graduated with honors, head boy and universally beloved. Charlie had led Gryffindor to Quidditch victory and left to study dragons in Romania, following his passion despite more lucrative offers. Percy accumulated badges and responsibilities, working toward his goal of ministry employment. The twins built their reputation as Hogwarts' premier pranksters, while secretly laying groundwork for their future business. Ron found his place as Harry Potter's best friend, loyal and brave in ways that would be tested repeatedly. And Ginny waited, not as patiently as she pretended, for her turn to join the legacy. She would enter Hogwarts in 1992, possessed by a dark artifact that would test her strength in ways no one could predict. But she would survive, would thrive, would become perhaps the most formidable Weasley of them all. The Weasley children's Hogwarts years were marked by laughter and danger, academic achievement and spectacular rule-breaking, ordinary school drama and extraordinary adventures. They carried their family's values with them: loyalty, courage, humor, and love, adapting them to new challenges while staying true to their roots. Each of them, in their own way, left their mark on the ancient school, adding new chapters to the Weasley family legend. Through it all, the Burrow remained their anchor. No matter how far they'd traveled or how long they were away, it was home. The crooked house with its impossible architecture and garden full of gnomes, where their mother's cooking could cure any homesickness, and their father's enthusiasm for Muggle artifacts never dimmed. Where there was always room for one more at the table, and love enough to spare for anyone who needed it. This was the gift Arthur and Molly gave their children. Not gold or status or material advantages, but a foundation strong enough to support any dream, a safety net woven from unconditional love, and the knowledge that no matter where their adventures took them, they would always have a home to return to, and a family that loved them exactly as they were. The summer of 1995 brought change to the Burrow like a gathering storm. Harry's arrival, traumatized and grieving from witnessing Cedric Diggory's murder and Voldemort's return, transformed the Weasley home from a cheerful chaos into something more complex. Part sanctuary, part headquarters, part field hospital for souls wounded by returning war. Arthur and Molly felt the weight of history repeating. They had lived through one war, lost brothers and friends, and raised their children in the peace that followed. Now that hard-won peace was shattering, and their children were old enough to fight. The kitchen table conferences that summer were heavy with unspoken fears as Order of the Phoenix members gathered, speaking in hushed tones about disappearances, about ministry denial, about the storm approaching. "We've been here before," Molly said one night, after the children were supposedly asleep, though she knew better than to think the extendable ears weren't deployed. "But last time, we didn't have children old enough to..." She couldn't finish the sentence. Arthur pulled her close, his own fears carefully hidden. We raised them right, Molly. They know what they're fighting for, and they know what they're fighting against. The dynamics at the Burrow that summer were delicate. Harry, dealing with trauma and the ministry's smear campaign, found comfort in the normalcy the Weasleys provided, even as they prepared for war. Ron stood steadfastly by his friend, maturing almost overnight from the boy who worried about homework to the young man ready to face death for those he loved. Hermione's presence added another layer, her brilliant mind working overtime to prepare them all for what was coming. Ginny, no longer the little girl with a crush, showed steel beneath her humor. Her experience with Tom Riddle's diary had given her unique understanding of Voldemort's evil, and she refused to be sidelined. The twins, their joke shop dreams temporarily on hold, threw their innovative genius into developing defensive products. They worked late into the nights in their room, explosions muffled by silencing charms, creating shield hats and decoy detonators that would save lives. Percy's estrangement cut deep wounds in the family fabric. His letter denouncing Harry as attention-seeking and his parents as fools arrived like a howler, poisoning the air with accusations and disappointment. Molly cried for 3 days. Arthur aged visibly. The empty chair at family dinners spoke louder than any argument. "We'll come back," Charlie said during one of his visits, trying to comfort his mother. "Percy's not stupid. He'll see the truth. Eventually. Eventually might be too late," Molly whispered, and they all knew she was thinking of her brothers, of all the reconciliations that war made impossible. Bill's engagement to Fleur Delacour brought unexpected light to darkening days. The Pot Vlad's arrival at the Burrow created friction initially, Molly and Ginny bristling at what they perceived as superiority, Fleur struggling with the chaos so different from her elegant upbringing. But crisis has a way of revealing character, and Fleur proved herself repeatedly, her fierce loyalty to Bill extending to his entire family. "She fought Grindylows for him," Harry reminded Ginny after one particularly snide comment about Flem. "She loves him." "I know," Ginny admitted grudgingly. "It's just... everything's changing so fast." The attack on Arthur at the Ministry marked a turning point. The sight of him, pale and blood-soaked in some mungos, drove home the war's reality in ways no order meeting could. Molly's desperate vigil, the children's faces white with fear, Harry's guilt, all combined to cement their unity. They were no longer preparing for war, they were in it. "Could have been worse," Arthur said weakly, trying to smile. "At least now I know what snake venom feels like." "Fascinating, really." "Arthur Weasley, if you turn this into a lesson about magical creatures, I swear I'll hex you myself," Molly interrupted, tears streaming down her face as she clutched his hand. The formation of Dumbledore's army gave the younger Weasleys purpose and hope. Ron's strategic mind, developed through years of wizard chess, proved invaluable in planning sessions. Ginny's powerful spell work, surprising those who still saw her as Ron's little sister, established her as a force to be reckoned with. Even the twins participated when they could, teaching defensive techniques disguised as pranks. Fred and George's departure from Hogwarts in a blaze of fireworks and swamp was both triumph and terror for their parents. Pride at their spectacular magical display warred with fear for their safety outside school protections. The opening of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes should have been pure joy, their entrepreneurial sons achieving their dreams. Instead, it was tinged with worry as Diagon Alley became increasingly dangerous. "At least people can still laugh," George said, showing his parents the sales figures. "We're thinking of it as our contribution to the war effort, morale and shield hats in equal measure." The summer of 1996 brought new tensions. Bill's scars from Greyback's attack were physical manifestations of war's cost. Watching him struggle with potential lycanthropy, seeing Fleur's fierce devotion as she declared his scars proved his bravery, reminded them all that love persisted even in darkness. Their wedding, planned for the following summer, became a beacon of hope, something normal and joyful to anticipate. Ron's poisoning on his birthday drove Molly to near hysteria. The realization that her children were targets, that even within Hogwarts they weren't safe, pushed her protective instincts into overdrive. Her attempts to extract promises from her children to stay safe, to not take risks, met with gentle but firm resistance. "We can't sit this out, Mum," Ron said quietly. "Harry needs us, the world needs us. You raised us to do what's right, not what's safe." Dumbledore's death shattered their world. The pillar that had seemed unshakable, the one adult who might have kept them safe, was gone. Harry's arrival at the Burrow for Bill and Fleur's wedding was bittersweet. Joy at having him safe mixed with knowledge that safety was temporary illusion. The family closed ranks, preparing for a wedding that everyone knew might be their last gathering. The wedding itself was a brief respite, a moment of beauty and normalcy in darkening times. Bill, scarred but smiling, married Fleur in the orchard where his parents had wed. Charlie managed to return from Romania. Even Percy's absence couldn't dim the joy of watching their eldest son marry the woman who'd proven her love so thoroughly. For a few hours, they could pretend the world wasn't ending. Then Kingsley's Patronus arrived, with news of the Ministry's fall, and pretense shattered. Death Eaters descended on the celebration, scattering the family. Ron's disappearance with Harry and Hermione left a hole in Molly's heart that no amount of logic could fill. Her youngest son, barely of age, vanished into danger, with only his friends beside him. "He's with Harry and Hermione," Arthur reminded her during the sleepless nights that followed. "They'll protect each other." "There are children," Molly whispered back. "They're just children playing at war." But they weren't children anymore, and this was no game. The Burrow, no longer safe, stood empty as the family scattered. Arthur continued at the Ministry, gathering intelligence and protecting Muggleborns where he could. Molly moved between safe houses, coordinating the Resistance's domestic front. Bill and Fleur made Shell Cottage a haven for refugees. Charlie recruited foreign support. The twins kept their shop open as long as possible, their products now focused entirely on defense and escape. Ginny's return to Hogwarts under the Carrows regime tested every parent's nightmare. Letters home ceased too dangerous to send. News came sporadically through the Resistance network. Ginny leading the reformed DA, Ginny standing up to the Carrows, Ginny being tortured for refusing to practice dark arts on first years. Each report aged Molly years, pride and terror warring in her heart. "She's our daughter," Arthur said after one particularly harrowing report. "Did we expect anything less?" "I expected her to be safe," Molly replied. "I expected all of them to be safe. Foolish, wasn't it?" Percy's return came at the darkest hour. He appeared at the Burrow's ruins, thin and haunted, apologies pouring out like blood from a wound. The family's forgiveness was immediate, if not uncomplicated. Fred's joke, "I was starting to think you'd been promoted to minister," broke the tension, allowing laughter and tears to mingle. The prodigal son had returned, just in time for what they all sensed was the end. "I was so stupid," Percy kept saying, "so blind. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." "You're here now," Molly interrupted, pulling him close. "That's all that matters, you're here." The Battle of Hogwarts called them all home in the worst way. Racing to the school where their children had learned and laughed, now to fight and possibly die, tested every fibre of parental instinct. Molly's fury at seeing Ginny in the Great Hall, prepared for battle, gave way to resigned pride. They were Weasleys. They would stand and fight. "You're underage," Molly protested one last time. "And you're my mother," Ginny replied firmly, "which is why you know I'm not leaving." The battle itself blurred into nightmare snapshots, Arthur and Percy fighting side by side, their reconciliation sealed in spellfire. Charlie and Bill decimating Death Eater ranks with coordinated attacks. Ron arriving with Harry and Hermione, grown beyond his years but still her baby boy. The twins' laughter echoing in the halls as they brought down Death Eaters with tricks turned lethal. Ginny fierce and fearless, standing with Luna and Neville as equals in war. And then the moment that shattered everything, Fred's death. One moment laughing at Percy's joke, the next gone forever. The wall exploded, and with it, part of the Weasley family's soul. George's scream echoed through the castle. Molly's world tilted off its axis. Arthur aged a decade in seconds. The remaining children rallied around their broken brother, but nothing would ever fill that Fred-shaped hole in their lives. "You actually are joking, Perce," were his last words, and wasn't that perfectly Fred? Going out with a laugh, bringing his estranged brother back into the fold with humor. Even in death, he was building bridges, making people smile, being essentially and eternally Fred. The aftermath of Voldemort's defeat couldn't re-erase the cost. They had won, but victory tasted like ashes with Fred gone. The family gathered at the Burrow, rebuilt but forever changed, trying to navigate grief while the wizarding world celebrated. George, half a person trying to be whole, threw himself into the joke shop with manic energy. Ginny, old beyond her years, helped Harry piece himself back together while dealing with her own trauma. Ron, war hero at 18, struggled with nightmares and survivor's guilt. "We survived," Molly said one evening. The family gathered for dinner with too many empty chairs. "That has to count for something." "We survived," Arthur agreed, raising his glass. "For Fred, for Fabian and Gideon, for everyone who didn't, we survived, and now we live." It's what they would want. The toast was quiet, tears mixing with tentative smiles. They were broken, but not destroyed. Grieving, but not defeated. They were Weasleys, and Weasleys endured. The war had taken so much, but it hadn't taken their core. The love that bound them, the values that defined them, the humor that sustained them even in darkness. In the months that followed, they slowly learned to be a family again, a different family, marked by loss but strengthened by survival. They honored Fred through laughter, keeping his memory alive in every prank played and joke told. They welcomed new members. Hermione, truly one of them now. Harry, the 8th Weasley child in all but blood. The grandchildren who would never meet their uncle, but would know his story. The Second Wizarding War had tested them in ways the First War hadn't. They had been combatants this time, not just survivors. They had lost a child, not just siblings. They had sent their children into battle, not just worried from afar. But they had also proven something vital, that love was stronger than hate, that family bonds could survive even death, that choosing to fight for what was right was worth any cost. The Burrow stood, wonky and wonderful, a testament to resilience. In its kitchen, Molly cooked meals for whoever needed feeding. In its garden, Arthur tinkered with Muggle artifacts, finding joy in simple curiosities. In its rooms, the next generation played and learned, carrying forward the Weasley legacy of love, laughter, and loyalty. The war was over, but their story continued, written in the daily choice to keep living, keep loving, keep being, essentially and eternally Weasley. The clock at the burrow never quite recovered from the war. Where once its hands had pointed confidently to school or work or home, now they wavered as if uncertain where family members truly were in a world so fundamentally changed. It was George who fixed it, finally, in the summer of 1999, charming it to include new locations, healing, remembering, and finding joy again. The late 1990s brought a peculiar kind of normalcy to the Weasley family, a careful reconstruction of life around the Fred-shaped absence that would never fully heal. Harry and Ron had joined the Auror program, throwing themselves into the work of rounding up remaining Death Eaters with a fervor that worried Molly. Hermione, predictably, had returned to Hogwarts to complete her NEX before joining the Ministry, with ambitious plans for reform. "At least eat something before you go," Molly fussed over Ron and Harry one morning, loading their plates with enough food for 5 people. "You can't catch dark wizards on an empty stomach." "Mom, we're just doing paperwork today," Ron protested, but he ate everything anyway. The war had taught them all not to take meals at the burrow for granted. Harry's integration into the family had become complete and unconscious. He had his own hand on the clock, his own Christmas jumper, now with a stag rather than just an H, his own seat at the table that no one else ever took. His relationship with Ginny, interrupted by war, resumed with the tentative care of 2 people who'd seen too much too young but chose love anyway. "I'm not going to sit at home waiting for you," Ginny told him firmly when he tried to protest the danger of her playing professional Quidditch. "We both know life's too short for that." She was right, of course. Ginny blazed onto the Quidditch pitch like she did everything else, with fierce determination and natural talent that took everyone's breath away. The Holyhead Harpies signed her straight from school, and Molly learned to listen to matches with her heart in her throat, proud and terrified in equal measure. George's journey was the hardest to watch. Some days he managed the shop with something approaching his old enthusiasm, developing new products that Fred would have loved. Other days, Molly would find him sitting in the stockroom, staring at half-finished inventions, tears streaming down his face. The family learned to navigate his grief like a physical presence in the room, giving him space when he needed it, surrounding him with love when he could accept it. "I keep forgetting he's gone," George admitted one evening, helping his mother with dinner. "I'll have an idea and turn to tell him, and..." He couldn't finish. "I know, dear," Molly said softly, understanding too well. She still set Fred's place at the table sometimes, muscle memory stronger than reality. It was Angelina Johnson who finally helped George find his way back to something resembling wholeness. She understood. She'd loved Fred too in her own way. Together they could talk about him, laugh about him, remember him, without the crushing weight of explanation. When they married in a quiet ceremony in 2000, Fred's absence was acknowledged in the empty space beside George. But so was his presence in every joke told, every smile shared. Percy threw himself into ministry reform with the zeal of someone making amends for past blindness. His work in the new administration, helping to rebuild magical government on more equitable foundations, showed the brilliance he'd always possessed, now tempered with humility. He came to Sunday dinners religiously, as if making up for all the ones he'd missed. Percy's proposing legislation to improve house elf working conditions, Arthur announced proudly one evening. "Hermione's been helping me draft it," Percy added, and the approval in Hermione's eyes meant more to him than any minister's commendation. Charlie remained in Romania but visited more frequently, bringing tales of dragons and occasionally dragon injuries that made Molly fuss and fret. His refusal to settle down became a family joke, though Molly suspected it was less about commitment fears and more about having seen too much loss to risk his heart easily. "Dragons are enough for me," he'd say when asked about marriage, but sometimes Molly caught him looking at happy couples with something wistful in his eyes. Bill and Fleur's announcement of their first pregnancy in the summer of 2999 brought pure, uncomplicated joy to the borough for the first time since the war. The family rallied around the expectant couple, knitting tiny jumpers, Molly theorizing about part Viella magical development, Arthur, and arguing about names, everyone. "If it's a boy, we're thinking Louis," Bill said carefully, watching his family's reaction. "And for a girl?" Ginny asked. "Victoire," Fleur said softly, "for victory, for surviving, for hope." The baby arrived on May 2, 2000, 2 years to the day after the Battle of Hogwarts. Victoire Weasley entered the world with a lusty cry and a shock of silvery blonde hair, transforming a day of grief into one of bittersweet joy. Holding his granddaughter for the first time, Arthur wept openly. "Fred would have loved her," he whispered. "Fred does love her," George corrected gently. "Wherever he is, he's probably teaching the other spirits baby pranks as we speak." The arrival of grandchildren opened a new chapter for Arthur and Molly. They were young grandparents by any standard, but the war had aged them in ways that had nothing to do with years. Molly threw herself into grandmothering with enthusiasm that sometimes overwhelmed her children. "Mom, she's only 6 months old," Bill protested as Molly attempted to teach Victoire basic wand movements. "She doesn't even have teeth yet." "It's never too early to start," Molly replied firmly, though she put the wand away. As 2001 dawned, Harry and Ginny's engagement surprised no one but delighted everyone. Harry proposed at the Burrow, in the garden where they'd spent so many summers, with the family pretending not to watch from various windows. Ginny's yes was accompanied by cheers from inside the house that rather ruined the private moment, but neither minded. This was family after all. Their wedding, held at the Burrow like all proper Weasley weddings, was everything Bill and Fleur's couldn't be, purely celebratory, with no shadow of impending doom. Ginny wore her mother's remade wedding dress, the fabric strengthened with preservation charms and love. Harry's face as she walked down the aisle made even Charlie tear up. "No crying at my wedding," Ginny ordered George, who was openly sobbing. "These are happy tears," he protested. "Fred would want me to cry happy tears, probably would have charmed them to be different colors if he were here." "Purple," Angelina suggested. "He always said purple tears would be brilliant." And just like that, Fred was part of the celebration, present in the laughter that followed. It was how they'd learned to live, carrying him with them not as a weight, but as a light, finding ways to include him in their joy rather than exclude joy because of his absence. Ron and Hermione's wedding 2 years later was equally joyful but characteristically different. Where Harry and Ginny had wanted simplicity, Ron and Hermione's ceremony reflected their journey, complex, sometimes difficult, but ultimately perfect. Hermione's parents, their memories restored, sat in the front row looking bewildered but proud. Molly cried through the entire ceremony, clutching Arthur's hand. "Our babies," she whispered. "When did they all grow up?" "Sometime between the troll and the Battle of Hogwarts," Arthur replied, his own eyes suspiciously wet. "Percy married Audrey in a ministry ceremony that he tried to keep small, but which somehow ended up including half the reformed government." George provided fireworks that spelled out embarrassing stories from Percy's childhood, which Percy pretended to be mortified by but secretly loved. The boy who'd once valued rules above family now laughed loudest at jokes made at his expense. As grandchildren multiplied, Dominique following Victoire, then Molly and Lucy from Percy, James from Harry and Ginny, the burrow expanded again. Not physically this time, but emotionally, its capacity for love proving infinite. Sunday dinners became logistical miracles, with high chairs crowding the kitchen and toys scattered everywhere. The noise level rivaled the days when all 7 Weasley children lived at home. "It's too quiet," Molly had complained in the years immediately after the war. Now, with grandchildren racing through the garden and their parents chasing after them, she sometimes wondered if she should have been more specific in her wishes. George and Angelina's son Fred II, George insisted. Never a replacement, but a continuation. Arrived in 2004. His birth was both healing and heartbreaking. This child, who would carry his uncle's name and hopefully his spirit. When he showed early signs of mischief, switching his parents' wands at 6 months old, George cried with relief. "He's got it," he told Angelina. "The spark, Fred's spark." "Of course he does," Angelina replied. "He's got the best of both Freds." The joke shop expanded into a small empire, with locations in Diagon Alley, Hogsmeade, and even Paris. George insisted on maintaining the original store exactly as it had been when Fred was alive, down to the half-finished products on his brother's workbench. It became a pilgrimage site of sorts for those who remembered the twins' particular brand of joy during dark times. "We're thinking of opening a foundation," George told the family one Christmas. "The Fred Weasley Foundation for Magical Mischief and Mayhem. Scholarships for students who show exceptional creativity in causing chaos." "Fred would love that," Charlie said immediately. "Fred would want us to make it tax-deductible chaos," Percy added, already thinking of the paperwork. As the children grew, the burrow became the center of an extended network of love and chosen family. Harry and Ginny's children, James, Albus, and Lily, spent as much time there as at home. Teddy Lupin, orphaned but never alone, had his own room and his own hand on the clock. Hermione's parents became regulars at Christmas, slowly adjusting to their magical extended family. Luna drifted in and out with tales of fantastic creatures and her own unique wisdom. Neville stopped by with Hannah, sharing news from Hogwarts, where he'd taken over as herbology professor. "Sometimes I can't believe we all made it," Ron said one evening, watching the extended family scatter across the burrow's lawn. "Not all of us, but most of us. We're the lucky ones," Harry agreed quietly. "We get to see what we fought for." And it was true. In the laughter of children who would never know war, in the peace of Sunday dinners uninterrupted by emergency order meetings, in the simple joy of complaining about work rather than fighting for survival, they saw victory's true face. It wasn't grand or glorious. It was daily life, lived without fear, love given freely without worry. It would be cut short, dreams pursued because the future was assured. Molly, watching her grandchildren play in the same garden where her own children had grown, felt the bittersweet pull of time. They were so young, so innocent, so beautifully unaware of how close they'd come to never existing at all. She saw Fred in George's son's grin, Fabian and Gideon in the way James and Albus worked together, her own mother in little Lily's determined chin. "We did it," she told Arthur that night, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over their impossible, wonderful home. "We raised them right. We survived. We're still here." Still here, Arthur agreed, pulling her close. Still together. Still Weasleys. The clock in the kitchen chimed, all its hands pointing to home. For now, for this moment, everyone was safe. Everyone was loved. Everyone was where they belonged. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Grandchildren to spoil, children to worry about, a joke shop to run, dragons to tend, Quidditch matches to win, dark wizards to catch, laws to reform, stories to write. But tonight, the Weasley family was complete in all the ways that mattered, bound by love that had survived the worst and chosen joy anyway. In the end, that was the Weasley legacy, not wealth or power or even the heroism they'd shown in war, but the simple, radical act of choosing love over fear, family over division, laughter over despair. They were ordinary people who had done extraordinary things, when necessary, but more importantly, they were a family who loved each other fiercely, completely, and forever. The burrow stood against the darkening sky, windows glowing with warm light, smoke rising from the chimney carrying the scent of Molly's cooking into the evening air. Inside, the Weasley family continued their beautiful, chaotic dance of life, adding new steps with each generation, while never forgetting the music that had brought them this far. They were home. They were together, and despite everything, because of everything, they were happy. Time moves differently at the Burrow. The old clock still marks the whereabouts of family members, though its face has been expanded twice and reinforced with unbreakable charms after little James Potter Weasley tried to add a having adventures setting with his toy wand. By 2017, the hands numbered in the dozens, tracking children and grandchildren across continents, and occasionally into mortal peril, though usually that just meant someone was taking their OWS or facing Molly's wrath for missing Sunday dinner. The transformation of the Weasley grandchildren from babies to young adults seemed to happen in the space between one Christmas and the next. Victoire, the eldest, blazed through Hogwarts with her mother's beauty and her father's quiet determination, becoming head girl and leading Gryffindor to 3 Quidditch Cups. Her relationship with Teddy Lupin surprised no one. The family had been taking bets on when, not if, since she was 15 and he was 17. It's like Harry and Ginny all over again, Ron observed, watching Teddy help Victoire practice chaser formations in the orchard. Except with the ability to change hair colors. At least we know he comes from good stock, Molly said, her definition of family having expanded far beyond blood years ago. Remus and Tonks would be so proud. Dominique took a different path, inheriting the Villa Allure, but using it primarily to negotiate better deals for the dragon reserve she established in Wales. Her Uncle Charlie's influence was clear, though she insisted her dragons were better trained than his Romanian ones. The sight of her arriving for family dinners, slightly singed and grinning, never failed to make Molly fuss, and Arthur leaned forward with interest. Did you know Welsh Greens can actually understand basic commands if you speak to them in Old Welsh? Dominique explained one evening, a bandage on her arm that was definitely not from a garden gnome. Fascinating, Arthur breathed, while Molly muttered something about all her grandchildren being determined to give her heart failure. Louis, the youngest of Bill's children, surprised everyone by becoming a curse breaker like his father, but specializing in historical preservation rather than tomb raiding. His gentle nature and scholarly bent reminded the family of Percy at his best, though with Bill's easy charm. He spent his holidays translating ancient texts and trying to convince his cousins that magical history was actually interesting. It's not just dates and goblin rebellions, he insisted to a skeptical James. Do you realize the statute of secrecy was nearly broken 17 times in the 19th century alone? and one of those times involved a Weasley ancestor who accidentally enchanted Queen Victoria's corgis. Percy's daughters, Molly and Lucy, could not have been more different. Molly inherited her father's ambition, but directed it toward magical journalism, becoming the youngest editor of the Daily Prophet's investigative division. She had a talent for uncovering corruption that made powerful people nervous, and her grandfather enormously proud. "She's got the Pruitt nose for justice," Arthur said, reading her latest exposé on illegal dragon egg trading, and the Weasley inability to leave well enough alone. Lucy, in contrast, opened a magical daycare center in Diagon Alley, combining her mother's healing background with Weasley creativity. Her ability to manage 20 magical toddlers simultaneously was considered by the family to be more impressive than any curse breaking or dragon taming. "It's all about anticipation," Lucy explained serenely, preventing two children from turning each other into turnips while simultaneously stopping a third from eating magical paint. "And having eyes in the back of your head. Literally. Uncle George helped me develop the charm." George and Angelina's children, Fred and Roxanne, carried on the joke shop tradition with innovation that would have made their namesake uncle proud. Fred II, despite the weight of his name, grew into it with grace, developing a line of therapeutic joke products that helped St. Mungo's patients dealing with spell damage. His giggling drafts became standard treatment for residual Dementor exposure. "Laughter really is healing," Fred told his parents, his face serious despite the rainbow-colored smoke currently emanating from his ears from a product test. "Uncle Fred knew that. I'm just adding a medical degree to it." Roxanne took the business in another direction, creating educational joke products that made learning fun. Her history hiccups, candies that caused the eater to recite historical facts in silly voices, became wildly popular among Hogwarts students preparing for exams. McGonagall pretended to disapprove, but was caught ordering them for her NEF students. Ron and Hermione's children faced the unique challenge of living up to war hero parents. Rose, brilliant like her mother but with her father's strategic mind, became the youngest person to achieve a mastery in arithmancy while simultaneously playing professional Quidditch. Her ability to calculate snitch probability patterns mid-sleight revolutionized the seeker position. "It's just maths," Rose said modestly after catching the snitch in record time during the World Cup qualifier. "Mum taught me that everything can be solved if you understand the underlying patterns." "Except your mother's organizational system," Ron added. "That defies all known magical and mathematical laws." Hugo chose a quieter path, becoming a healer specializing in magical creature injuries. His gentle nature and intuitive understanding of non-human patients made him invaluable at St. Mungo's expanded creature care ward. He could calm a rampaging hippogriff with a look, and had successfully treated everything from pixie bites to dragonpox. "Someone needs to look after the creatures who can't speak for themselves," Hugo explained, carefully bandaging a niffler who'd gotten into a fight with a jewelry box. "Uncle Charlie always said they deserve the same care as wizards." The Potter children, raised in the unique position of being both Weasleys and children of the boy who lived, each handled their heritage differently. James, the eldest, embraced it with characteristic Potter confidence and Weasley mischief. His time at Hogwarts was marked by pranks that rivaled his namesake's, though with notably less malice and more creativity. Turned the entire Great Hall into a beach paradise during February, McGonagall reported to Harry and Ginny, trying to sound stern despite the twitch of her lips, complete with warm sand, palm trees, and a charm that made everyone speak in beach slang. It took us 3 days to fully reverse it. Only 3 days? Ginny asked innocently. He must be slipping. Albus, carrying the weight of his name, found his own path by excelling in potions and forming an unlikely friendship with Scorpius Malfoy. Their partnership, initially shocking to both families, became a symbol of how far the wizarding world had come. When they opened a breakthrough medical research facility together after Hogwarts, even Draco Malfoy was seen shaking Arthur Weasley's hand at the opening ceremony. "Times change," Arthur said simply when asked about it later. And thank Merlin for that. Lily Potter, the youngest, inherited her mother's fierce spirit and her grandmother's protective instincts. She became an aura like her father, but specialized in victim advocacy, ensuring those affected by dark magic received support long after the criminals were caught. Her combination of Potter bravery and Weasley compassion made her formidable in the field and beloved in the department. "She made a Death Eater cry with disappointment in himself," Harry reported proudly after Lily's first major arrest. "Didn't even use magic, just talked to him about his choices and his mother until he was sobbing and apologizing." The expansion of the family wasn't limited to blood relations. Teddy Lupin was as much a Weasley as any grandchild, his hair frequently matching whoever he was sitting next to at family dinners. His marriage to Victoire in 2019 was less a joining of families than a formal acknowledgement of what had always been true. "I'm not gaining a son-in-law," Bill said in his wedding speech. "I'm just making official what's been true since he was sleeping in a crib next to Victoire's bed. Haas's family." The joke shop empire, now run jointly by George's children and Ron, who'd left the Auras to help with the business side, expanded internationally. Weasley's Wizards Wheezes had locations in Paris, New York, and Tokyo, with each shop adapting products to local magical traditions. The French location specialized in romance pranks, the Americans loved anything that made noise, and the Japanese branch developed a line of origami creatures that came to life and performed helpful tasks before folding themselves back up. "Fred would have loved this," George said during the Tokyo opening, watching Japanese wizards delight in portable swamps adapted to grow cherry blossoms. He always said laughter was a universal language. The family's influence extended beyond business. Hermione, now Minister for Magic, had appointed various Weasleys to positions throughout the ministry, not through nepotism, but because, as she pointed out, "They're simply the best qualified, and I refuse to penalize them for being related to me." Percy served as senior undersecretary with a humor his younger self would never have displayed. His ability to find the absurdity in bureaucracy while still maintaining efficiency made him invaluable. He'd been known to approve forms with joke wands that left glitter trails, claiming it improved morale. "Laughter and efficiency aren't mutually exclusive," he explained to a bewildered junior staff member. "My brother Fred taught me that, eventually." Charlie, finally settling down in his 60s with a fellow dragon keeper named Marcus, brought his husband home for Christmas 2020. The family's reaction was typically Weasley, immediate acceptance mixed with gentle teasing about how long it had taken him to admit dragons weren't the only creatures worth dedicating your life to. "I knew when he fixed the singe marks on my favorite robes without being asked," Charlie explained while Marcus blushed. "Anyone who understands that dragon keepers have sentimental attachments to burn patterns is worth keeping." Arthur's retirement party from the ministry became a testament to how one genuinely kind man could impact so many lives. Wizards and witches from every department came to honor the man who'd spent decades protecting muggles, promoting understanding, and maintaining enthusiasm for rubber ducks that transcended mere eccentricity to become inspirational. Never met a Muggle artifact he didn't find fascinating, Kingsley said in his speech, or a person he didn't treat with dignity. The Ministry is losing its heart, but will try to remember his lessons. Molly's response to retirement was to cook even more if such a thing were possible. Sunday dinners now required extension charms on the garden, warming charms on multiple courses, and a small army of self-washing dishes. She presided over the chaos with the satisfaction of a general watching a well-won campaign. Victoire, make sure Teddy eats something besides pudding. James, stop charming the peas to march into Albus's mouth. Rose, help your father. He's lost in the new recipe organization system again. Fred, if that canary cream ends up in anyone's food, you're washing dishes the Muggle way. The commands flew as fast as the food, creating order from chaos with the practice of decades. This was her domain, her kingdom, her victory, a family that had survived everything the world could throw at them and chosen to keep gathering, keep laughing, keep loving. The ghoul in the attic, ancient now even by ghoul standards, had become something of a family mascot. The grandchildren took turns bringing it treats and teaching it new clanking patterns. When it finally passed away peacefully, if ghouls could be said to do anything peacefully, the family held a proper funeral, complete with clanking musical tributes and stories about its most memorable midnight disturbances. "We was with us longer than some family members," George said solemnly, though his lips twitched, "and significantly less trouble than most of us." "Speak for yourself," said Ginny, who was banned from the attic for a year at age 7 after teaching the ghoul to bang out Quidditch scores. As 2024 dawned, the family faced new challenges and changes. Grandchildren were having children of their own, requiring another expansion of the clock and strong reinforcement charms on the burrow's foundations. The old house creaked and swayed, but stood firm, held together by magic and memories in equal measure. Technology had finally begun creeping into the wizarding world in ways that Arthur found endlessly delightful. The younger generation's casual integration of modified Muggle devices with magical enhancements gave him new projects in retirement. His workshop, now shared with several grandchildren, produced innovations that would have been unimaginable in his youth. "Look at this," he exclaimed, showing off a mobile phone charmed to work around magic. "Hugo helped me figure out how to make the batteries run on ambient magical energy. Sustainable and efficient." "Dad, you're literally bouncing," Bill observed, amused. "Of course I am. Do you realize what this means for Muggle magical cooperation? The possibilities are endless." His enthusiasm remained infectious even in his 80s, inspiring new generations to see wonder in the everyday and magic in the mundane. It was perhaps the greatest gift he passed on, the ability to find joy in discovery, to see potential where others saw problems. The family business ventures had diversified beyond anyone's imagination. Besides the joke shop empire, there was Dominique's Dragon Reserve, Lucy's daycare centers, now a chain, Rose's Quidditch analytics firm, and Hugo's creature clinic. The Weasley name, once synonymous with poverty, now represented innovation, integrity, and an inability to do anything by halves. "We're an empire," Ron marveled one evening, looking at a family organization chart Hermione had created, color-coded and spell-checked naturally. "We're a family," Molly corrected firmly. "Everything else is just what happens when you raise children to follow their dreams." The annual Battle of Hogwarts memorial service remained a family affair, though it had evolved over the years. What began as a day of grief had transformed into a celebration of life, with Fred's name read alongside the others, but his memory honored through laughter rather than just tears. George always told a new Fred story, carefully saved for the occasion, ensuring his twin remained vivid and present rather than fading into history. "Would have hated us being all solemn," George said every year. So here's the story of how Fred once convinced Filch that his mop was possessed by the spirit of a former caretaker. The stories grew with the telling, probably far beyond their original truth, but that was the point. Fred became larger than life in death, as he'd been in life, a family legend passed down through generations who'd never met him but knew him through the stories, the laughter, the love that refused to let him go. When Ginny retired from professional Quidditch, she took over as Hogwarts flying instructor, bringing her fierce competitive spirit and protective instincts to new generations. Her first act was to upgrade the school brooms. Her second was to institute safety measures that would have prevented half her own school injuries. And her third was to secretly teach advanced moves to promising students, swearing them to secrecy with mock seriousness. If McGonagall asks, "You learned that Wronski feint from a book," she told her advanced class, winking. A very theoretical, very safe book. Harry's work reforming the Aura department had created a force that emphasized protection and prevention over punishment. Many Weasley grandchildren had gone through the program, bringing their family values of justice tempered with mercy into law enforcement. The old days of shoot-first auras were gone, replaced by investigators who understood that understanding dark magic meant recognizing the humanity in those who used it. "Evil isn't born," Harry would tell new recruits, many of whom looked at him with awe that made him uncomfortable even after all these years. "It's made by choices, circumstances, and missed opportunities for intervention. Our job is to stop it, yes, but also to understand it. Prevention is better than punishment." The family's influence on wizarding society was impossible to ignore, but never flaunted. They'd become what magical historians would later call a dynasty of decency, their power coming not from accumulated wealth or political maneuvering, but from consistent principles applied with humor and heart across generations. When little Victoire's daughter asked why their family was special, it was Arthur who answered, bouncing the newest great-grandchild on his knee with practiced ease. "We're not special, dear one. We're just ourselves, and we're not afraid to show it. We choose love over fear, laughter over anger, and family over everything else. That's not special, that's just smart. And we have the best grandmother's cooking in the world," added James's son, who'd inherited the Potter appetite and the Weasley appreciation for Molly's talents. "Well, that too," Arthur agreed, smiling at Molly, who was already planning what to feed this newest addition to their ever-growing clan. As the 2020s progressed, the Weasley family tree had become less of a tree and more of a magnificent, sprawling vine that wrapped around half the wizarding world. The joke that you couldn't throw a gnome in magical Britain without hitting a Weasley relation had become delightfully close to truth. The burrow, reinforced with so many extension and strengthening charms that curse breakers used it as a case study, somehow managed to accommodate them all for the increasingly massive gatherings that marked every holiday, birthday, and occasion worth celebrating. Victoire and Teddy's children embodied the beautiful complexity of their heritage. Their eldest, Remus Arthur Lupin, inherited his father's Metamorph Magnus abilities and his mother's Vela charm, a combination that made his teenage years particularly interesting. He could literally become anyone's type, a power he wielded with the responsibility drilled into him by parents who understood the weight of gifts. "Just because you can doesn't mean you should," Teddy would remind him, remembering his own teenage struggles with identity. "Your real self is always the best self." Young Remus took this to heart, eventually using his abilities to become a magical diplomat, shape-shifting not for deception but for communication, helping bridge cultural gaps by literally seeing through others' eyes. His work with the International Confederation of Wizards earned him recognition, but he was proudest of the letter from his namesake's portrait at Hogwarts, saying he'd honored the name well. Their daughter, Nymphadora, who insisted on being called Dora, much to her late grandmother's portent amusement, proved that rebellion could skip generations. Where her parents were responsible and measured, Dora was wild and impulsive, using her inherited metamorph magus abilities primarily to give her grandparents heart attacks by showing up to formal dinners with fluorescent tentacles for hair. It's artistic expression, she'd insist, while Molly tried not to laugh and Fleur muttered about the importance of proper presentation. "Let her be," Bill would say, remembering his own earring and long hair phase. "She'll find her way." She did, eventually channeling her creativity into becoming a magical tattoo artist whose work could move, change, and tell stories on skin. Her shop in Diagon Alley became a pilgrimage site for those wanting to wear their memories, their dreams, their magic on their bodies. Even Percy got one eventually, a small, proper phoenix that only danced when he laughed, which his siblings noted was rather more often these days. Dominique's marriage to a Japanese dragon keeper she met at an international symposium brought new cultural traditions into the Weasley fold. Their children, Sakura and Hirotoshi, grew up trilingual and tricultural, as comfortable with chopsticks as wands. Celebrating both Christmas at the Burrow and New Year at their other grandparents' magical shrine in Kyoto, they brought the family recipes for magical sushi that moved on the plate and introduced their cousins to origami dragons that breathed real, if tiny, flames. Food that fights back, Ron marveled at his first encounter with particularly active sashimi. "Mum, you've got competition." "Nonsense," Molly said, though she immediately began experimenting with self-assembling Wellington that could defend itself from overcooking. Louis surprised everyone by marrying Lysander Scamander, Luna's son, in a ceremony that perfectly blended Weasley chaos with Lovegood whimsy. The wedding featured butterfly releases that turned into fireworks, vows written in ancient runes that glowed as they were spoken, and a cake that showed the guests' happiest memories when eaten. Their adoption of twins from war-torn magical communities in Eastern Europe added 2 more faces to the ever-expanding family clock. "Love makes a family," Louise said simply when asked about the adoption process. "Everything else is just paperwork." The twins, Petra and Pavel, arrived at the Burrow speaking no English but fluent in the universal language of mischief. Within months, they were indistinguishable from born Weasleys, their accents fading as their collection of Weasley jumpers grew. Petra showed an early talent for magical painting that moved and lived, while Pavel demonstrated the Weasley gift for invention, though his creations tended more toward the artistic than the practical. Percy's daughters continued to blaze their own trails. Molly's investigative journalism had evolved into magical documentary making, her exposés on corruption in international Quidditch leading to major reforms. She married her longtime partner, a Muggle-born witch named Cassandra, who worked in magical law, and their wedding featured a spectacular argument about the proper way to word binding magical contracts that somehow turned into a dance number. "Only our daughter could turn legal documentation into performance art," Percy said proudly, wiping his eyes as Molly and Cassandra waltzed to the rhythm of whereas clauses. Lucy's daycare empire had evolved into a comprehensive magical education system for pre-Hogwarts children. Her innovative approach to early childhood magical development caught the attention of educational theorists worldwide. when she published her groundbreaking work, Accidental Magic, a developmental approach. Even Hermione admitted she'd learned something new. It's not about controlling accidental magic, Lucy explained at her book launch. It's about understanding it as the child's first language of emotional expression. We've been approaching it all wrong for centuries. Her marriage to a mild-mannered herbologist named Finn resulted in 3 children who could make plants grow with their emotions, turning tantrums into gardens and happiness into flower explosions. Family dinners at their house required strong antihistamines and appreciation for botanical chaos. George and Angelina's son, Fred, had married his Hogwarts sweetheart, a brilliant Ravenclaw named Indira, whose parents had immigrated from India. Their children brought yet another cultural strand into the Weasley tapestry, celebrating Diwali with magical fireworks that told stories in the sky and Holei with color-changing powder that responded to emotions. Fred's continued work combining healing with humor had earned him a Order of Merlin Second Class, which he kept in the joke shop next to a sign reading, "Second place in the Fred competition, still working on first." Uncle Fred would have found that hilarious, he said when asked about the display, though he probably would have charmed it to make rude gestures when ministry officials walked by. Roxanne had taken the business international, but her real innovation was in magical accessibility. Her products weren't just fun, they were designed to be usable by those with various magical disabilities. Self-spelling wands for those with motor difficulties, visual vowlers for the hearing impaired, and texture texts for the blind made magic accessible to all. Her work earned her recognition from advocacy groups worldwide, though she was proudest of the letters from children who could finally join in magical games with their peers. "Everyone deserves to laugh," she said simply, sounding remarkably like her grandfather. "Magic should never be a barrier to joy." Rose Granger Weasley's Quidditch analytics had revolutionized the sport, but her marriage to Scorpius Malfoy had perhaps made even bigger waves. The union of Granger Weasley and Malfoy names had caused several elderly purebloods to require calming drafts, but the couple themselves found the fuss amusing. Their son, Hyperion, managed to inherit Hermione's brains, Ron's strategic thinking, and somehow Draco's cheekbones, creating a child who could probably take over the world if he weren't so interested in magical marine biology. "Gets it from me," Scorpius would say with a straight face. "The Malfoys have always been interested in things that lurk in the depths." "The only thing lurking in your depths is a secret fondness for Celestina Warbeck," Rose would counter, making her husband blush and her father-in-law pretend he hadn't heard. Hugo's quiet life as a healer had taken an unexpected turn when he'd fallen in love with one of his patients, a werewolf named Marcus who'd been injured in an accident. Their relationship, conducted carefully around full moons and hospital schedules, had resulted in a beautiful wedding where Molly had finally gotten to use all her werewolf accommodation planning from Remus and Tonks's era. Their adoption of a young werewolf boy named David, who'd been abandoned by his birth family, added another layer to the family's diversity. "We're collecting the whole set," George joked at one family dinner. "Werewolves, Veela, metamorph magi. Anyone know a vampire looking for a loving home?" "Don't give them ideas," Hermione muttered, but she was smiling as she watched David carefully practice levitating his peas under Hugo's patient guidance. James Potter had married a fierce Croatian chaser he met during his professional Quidditch career. Petra, not to be confused with Lewis's adopted daughter, brought a level of competitive spirit to the family that rivaled even Ginny's. Their 3 children had barely learned to walk before they were on brooms, and their house had to be extensively ward-proofed after their eldest showed a talent for accidental apparition at age 4. "It's not a competition," Ginny would say when babysitting her grandchildren, while simultaneously teaching them advanced flying techniques. "But if it were, you'd be winning." Albus's life had taken a quieter turn. His potions research with Scorpius had resulted in breakthrough treatments for spell damage, but he'd found his true calling in teaching. As the youngest ever potions master at Hogwarts, he brought patience and innovation to the dungeons, turning the most feared subject into one students actually enjoyed. His husband, a gentle Hufflepuff named Eric who worked with magical creatures, often brought specimens for demonstrations, creating memorable lessons that occasionally required evacuation. "At least it's not as bad as when grandfather brought the whomping willow seedling for career day," Albus would say, vanishing whatever had just exploded. "That took weeks to sort out." Lily Potter had blazed through the Aura ranks with a combination of skill and compassion that reminded everyone of the best of both her parents. Her work with victims of dark magic had evolved into a comprehensive reform of how the magical world dealt with trauma. Her marriage to Lorcan Scamander, making Luna officially family as if she hadn't always been, resulted in twins who seemed to have inherited every ounce of their parents' combined uniqueness. The children could see through most concealment charms and had an uncanny ability to know when someone needed help, traits that made them either future auras or therapists, possibly both. "They're unsettling," Ron admitted after his great-niece had patted his hand and told him it was okay to still miss Fred. "Brilliant, but unsettling." "They're perceptive," Luna corrected dreamily. "They see the rackspurts of the soul." "Right," Ron said, exchanging glances with Harry. That's what I meant." The family gatherings had evolved into events requiring military-level planning. Hermione, in her final term as minister, had joked about appointing a Weasley family gathering committee, only to find that Molly had already created one, complete with subcommittees for food, accommodation, entertainment, and what was diplomatically termed incident prevention, mainly keeping track of which cousins had inherited the twins' inventing gene. "I've hosted state dinners with less complexity," Hermione said, reviewing the seating chart for Easter dinner that had to account for 2 vegetarians, 1 vegan, 3 people with dragon allergies, and keeping certain invention-prone cousins away from each other and the cutlery. "At least state dinners don't usually end with the garden being transformed into a swamp," Arthur pointed out cheerfully. "Remember Christmas 2019? "We agreed never to speak of Christmas 2019, Molly said firmly, though her lips twitched. "The gnomes still haven't forgiven us." The burrow itself had become something of a magical marvel. Cursebreakers studied its construction, theorizing that the only thing keeping it standing was the accumulated love of generations. Every wonky angle, every impossible room, every patch and repair told a story. The ghoul had been replaced by his descendants. Apparently ghouls did have families, who had been trained by the grandchildren to bang out popular songs on request. "It's the most architecturally impossible building in Britain," Bill said proudly, his Cursebreaker instincts both offended and impressed. "It should have collapsed years ago. The fact that it hasn't is either the greatest magical achievement of our time, or proof that love really is the most powerful magic." "It's both," Molly said simply, patting a wall that creaked affectionately in response. The joke shop empire had evolved beyond George's wildest dreams. Weasley's Wizard Wheezes was now a multinational corporation with divisions for entertainment, education, defense, and therapeutic magic. The original shop in Diagon Alley remained exactly as Fred and George had left it, a memorial and museum that still sold products but also told the story of 2 boys who believed laughter could save the world. George, now silver-haled but still quick to smile, served as creative director emeritus, which meant he showed up whenever he felt like it and invented things that either delighted or terrified his employees. His greatest achievement, he claimed, wasn't the business empire but the fact that Fred's name was spoken with smiles rather than sadness. "We did it, Freddy," he'd sometimes say to the portrait in his office, one of the few magical portraits that could prank visitors. "We really did it." The influence of the Weasley family on wizarding society was studied by historians and sociologists. They'd shown that pureblood status meant nothing compared to values, that wealth wasn't measured in gold, and that power came from lifting others up rather than holding them down. Multiple academic papers had been written about the Weasley effect, how one family's consistent choices toward inclusion, innovation, and integrity had shifted an entire culture. "We didn't set out to change the world," Arthur mused one evening, surrounded by the cheerful chaos of 5 generations. "We just wanted to raise good children." "Well, you failed spectacularly at normal," Charlie said, visiting from Romania with Marcus and their adopted daughter, who was currently teaching her cousins how to speak to garden snakes. "But I suppose good works too." The family's approach to tradition had evolved beautifully. They kept what mattered: Sunday dinners, hand-knitted jumpers, the clock that tracked everyone, while adapting to changing times. Molly now cooked with help from enchanted cookbooks that could adjust recipes for various dietary needs. The Christmas jumpers might include cooling charms for those in warmer climates. The clock had been upgraded to show emotional states as well as locations, leading to more check-ins when someone's hand pointed to struggling. "Technology and tradition," Arthur said proudly, showing off the latest modification to the family clock. It could now send alerts to those new mobile phone contraptions when someone was in genuine peril. The best of both worlds. The younger generation brought fresh perspectives while honoring family history. They attended Hogwarts wearing second-hand robes by choice rather than necessity, understanding the value of connection over appearance. They played Quidditch with the same battered set of balls their parents had used, magically maintained but never replaced. They learned that wealth meant having enough to share, success meant making others' lives better, and family meant anyone who needed a place at the table. When Molly and Arthur renewed their vows for their 75th anniversary, the entire extended family gathered in the orchard where it all began. The ceremony was simple. They'd never been ones for ostentation, but the guest list read like a who's who of the wizarding world. Former students Harry had taught, creatures Charlie had saved, curse victims Bill had helped, children from Lucy's daycares, patients of Hugo's, readers of Molly's articles, inventors inspired by the twins, all came to honor a couple whose greatest magic had been creating a family that redefined what family meant. 75 years, Arthur said, his voice still strong despite his age, his hand steady in Molly's. 7 children, too many grandchildren to count without magical assistance, great-grandchildren who think I'm furniture, and I wouldn't change a single moment. "I might change a few," Molly admitted, thinking of Fred, of the war, of the struggles and loss. "But then we wouldn't be who we are, and who we are is exactly who we're meant to be." As the sun set over the burrow, painting the sky in shades of Weasley red, the family celebrated not just a marriage, but a legacy. Children chased gnomes through the garden, teenagers practiced Quidditch moves, adults caught up on each other's lives, and elders watched it all with satisfaction. The clock in the kitchen showed all hands pointing to home, but home had become more than a location. It was a state of being, a choice to belong, a promise to stand together. The Weasley family had started as blood traitors and paupers, been dismissed as breeding beyond their means, marked for their second-hand everything and first-hand nothing. They'd faced war, loss, prejudice and poverty. They had been tested by division, death, and the simple exhaustion of never quite having enough, but they'd endured, evolved, and ultimately thrived by remembering that the only wealth that mattered was love. The only power worth having was the ability to help others, and the only legacy worth leaving was the knowledge that you'd made the world a little warmer, a little kinder, a little more magical, just by being in it. As the party continued into the night, with fairy lights twinkling in the trees and laughter echoing across the countryside, it was clear that the Weasley story was far from over. New chapters were being written by small hands, learning to hold wands. New verses added by voices just learning to speak. New magic discovered by hearts just learning to love. The family that had begun with medieval hedge wizards and survived through the centuries by adaptation, innovation, and sheer stubborn refusal to give up had become something unprecedented. A dynasty built not on power or purity, but on the radical act of choosing love over fear. Every single time. And in the Burrow's kitchen, where so many meals had been cooked, and tears had been shed, and plans had been made, and babies had been born, the clock ticked on. Its hands might point to 100 different places now, tracking Weasleys across continents and careers, but its heart remained constant. This was home. This was family. This was magic. The ghoul in the attic, great-great-grandchool of the original, banged out a rhythm that sounded remarkably like "Weasley is our king," and for once, nobody told it to quiet down. As our journey through the generations draws to a close, we find ourselves back where we began, in a crooked house held together by magic and love, where the scent of fresh bread mingles with the sound of laughter, where every corner holds a memory, and every memory holds a lesson about what truly matters in this world. The story of the Weasley family is not one of grand conquests or accumulated wealth. It is quieter than that, and infinitely more powerful. It is the story of ordinary people who chose, again and again, to do the right thing rather than the easy thing, who understood that true wealth was measured in the people around your table, not the gold in your vault, who knew that pure blood meant nothing compared to a pure heart. From those ancient roots in Devon's misty hills, where the first Weasleys worked their hedge magic and helped their neighbours, through centuries of adaptation and survival, the thread that runs constant is this: love multiplies when divided. The more you give away, the more you have. The larger your definition of family, the stronger your family becomes. We've watched them grow from medieval wisdom keepers to modern innovators, always maintaining that core of kindness that defined them. We've seen them face persecution for their choices, Cedrella cast out for choosing love, the family mocked for their poverty, their children fighting in wars that should never have been necessary. But we've also seen them triumph through simple persistence, through the radical act of continuing to choose joy in the face of sorrow, hope in the face of despair. The Burrow stands still, weathered and patched, expanded and reinforced, but essentially unchanged. It remains what it has always been, a sanctuary for anyone who needs it, a place where you're loved for who you are rather than what you have, where the kettle is always on and there's always room for one more at the table. The hands on the enchanted clock may number in the hundreds now, tracking Weasleys and chosen family across the globe, but they all point back to this truth. Home is not a place, but a promise. not a building, but a belonging. In Molly's kitchen, recipes passed down through generations are still cooked with love as the main ingredient. In Arthur's workshop, the wonder of discovery continues as great-grandchildren learn that magic exists not just in wands, but in curiosity, in the joy of understanding how things work. In the garden, gnomes that have been there for generations teach new Weasley children their first lessons in magical creatures, mainly that they bite if grabbed incorrectly. In their lives, mainly that they bite if grabbed incorrectly. The ghoul in the attic, descendant of descendants, maintains the family tradition of making noise at inconvenient times. The garden grows wild and wonderful, mixing magical and mundane plants in cheerful defiance of proper herbological practice. The house itself creaks and sways, but stands firm, proof that love is the strongest magic of all. As night falls over Otteries and Catchpole, as it has for 1,000 years, the burrow's windows glow with warm light. Inside, somewhere, a child is learning their first spell. A teenager is complaining about homework. Parents are worrying about bills and celebrating small victories. Grandparents are telling stories that grow more elaborate with each telling. Someone is cooking. Someone is laughing. Someone is coming home. This is the legacy of the Weasley family, not gold or glory, but the quiet revolution of choosing love. In a world that often values power over kindness, wealth over warmth, they stood as proof that the other way was not only possible, but preferable. They showed that you could be poor in gold but rich in everything that mattered, that you could face darkness and choose light, that you could lose people you loved and choose to love even more fiercely rather than close your heart. From ancient times to modern day, through war and peace, through joy and sorrow, the Weasleys have endured. Not through strength or cunning or accumulated power, but through the simple, radical act of loving each other and extending that love to anyone who needed it. They built their empire not on conquered lands, but on opened hearts, measured their success not in achievements, but in the lives they touched. And so, dear listener, as you drift off to sleep, perhaps you'll dream of a crooked house where magic lives in everyday moments, where the greatest spell is a mother's hug, the most powerful potion is a shared meal, and the strongest ward is the knowledge that you are loved, completely and unconditionally, exactly as you are. Dream of gardens where anything can grow if tended with care. Dream of kitchens where there's always enough food because love multiplies what you have. Dream of families that extend beyond blood, of homes that welcome all who need shelter, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things simply by choosing kindness in a world that often forgets its value. The Weasley story reminds us that we all have magic within us. The magic to make others feel welcome, to stand up for what's right, to find joy in simple pleasures, to build families of choice and homes of the heart. It reminds us that heroes don't always wear capes or win glory. Sometimes they wear hand-knitted jumpers, and their greatest victory is raising children who know they are loved. As you close your eyes and let sleep take you, remember this. You don't need a vault full of gold to be rich. You don't need pure blood to be magical. You don't need power to make a difference. All you need is the courage to choose love over fear, the wisdom to know that family is what you make it, and the understanding that the smallest acts of kindness can change the world. The clock ticks on, the house stands firm, the family endures. And somewhere, in a crooked house held up by magic and memory, love continues to multiply, defying all laws of arithmetic, proving once and for all that the most powerful magic has always been and will always be the simplest, choosing to care for one another. Sweet dreams, dear listener. May your sleep be filled with warm kitchens and gardens where magic grows wild. May you wake tomorrow knowing that you too can choose the kind of magic the Weasleys chose. The magic of an open heart, an open door, and an open hand extended to anyone who needs it. The story ends as all the best stories do, not with an ending at all, but with a continuation. For somewhere right now, a new Weasley is being born, or someone is being welcomed into the family not by blood, but by choice. Somewhere the clock is adding a new hand. Somewhere the burrow's walls are expanding just a little bit more to make room for one more story, one more memory, one more moment of magic. And the magic continues, as it always has and always will, in the simple act of choosing love. Good night, and sleep well, surrounded by the warmth of a story that reminds us all what family truly means.